Thank you and welcome everyone back from lunch. I hope everyone had a good lunch. We're going to reconvene the Finance Committee related to the city budget. Now ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Evans.
Present.
Councilmember Harris.
Present.
Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Vice President Lightfoot.
Present, ma'am.
President Scott.
Here.
Thank you. We are joined by all of our other city colleagues, and we are also streaming today's hearing on our social media and broadcasting live on City 12. I want to thank the Rochester Police Department, Chief Singletary, and your team for being here. How we are going to run this hearing is we will give the chief the opportunity to introduce his team and make any statements that he may have. And then we will get right into the overall police budget section. I would just ask everyone to please be mindful of your time. If you have questions, if you please cannot ask them all at once, so that way we can make sure everyone at least gets at least one pass through. And also, if you are asking a question about a particular section, if you can refer us to that section, so that way the question can be answered there. So with that, Chief Singletary, thank you so much for being here today. I want to turn it over to you to introduce your team and make any statements that you may have.
Thank you, Councilmember Evans. Joining me today, I have Deputy Chief Mark Simmons. I have Deputy Chief Mark Mura, Commander Elena Correa, Captain Mark Whiter, Nick Petiti, Director of Animal Services, Chris Fitzgerald, Deputy Chief of Operations, Joe Morabito, as well as Commander Henry Favor, who's also joining with us as well. Thank you for the opportunity. Consistent with many law enforcement agencies across the country, we have, RP has created a budget that not only adjusts to our new normal prior to the pandemic upending our organization, but also takes us back into the future with a steady eye moving forward with accomplishing our mission, which is to reduce crime, to protect and serve the citizens of Rochester, and to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York. Throughout the last couple of weeks, we've seen issues surrounding law enforcement, and the RPD continues to be at the forefront, continue to work with our partners in government as well as our partners in the community to try to address many of the issues that we are seeing around the country in law enforcement. And we look forward to taking any of your questions and answering those questions.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. I'm going to start with Councilmember Gruber and then Councilmember Patterson.
Thank you, Chair Evans and Chief Singletary. I think it'd be impossible to ask any questions about the budget without first recognizing the gravity of the national moment, as you recognized yourself, and recognizing the tragic murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville and George Floyd in Minneapolis. I want to start out by expressing my personal thanks to Mayor Warren and to you for making sure that we're not Minneapolis. And I think that there's something that happened in the last year that I think makes it very clear that we're not Minneapolis, and that was the Christopher Pay case and the handling of Officer Sipple. I think in a lot of other cities, a lot of things would have gone a lot differently. And I think it's a testament to your leadership and to Mayor Warren's choice of you as chief and her decision to discipline Officer Sipple the way that she did, that shows one of the ways that we are different as a community. That being said, there is one thing, well, there's a number of things that I'll ask questions about, but I'm going to only focus on one thing right now, and it's something that I talked about at length my only 2 years on council, and that is overtime. Last year specifically, we talked a great deal about overtime, and I believe there are significant cuts that need to be made to police overtime this year, specifically related to the fact that we are in a budget that has to make significant cuts. Last year when we spoke, I actually went back and listened to the audio of the budget hearings last year. And there was about $7 million budgeted to overtime. And you responded, Chief, that you were going to work very hard to try to get that number down to 6 million. We left it with your department providing some type of quarterly or regularly reports. I looked on the budget stuff from last year, and question 39, we were supposed to get reports. I didn't see any reports. So I really would like to know, number one, Where's overtime projected to end on June 30 this year? And number two, before I ask additional questions, I want answers on this one. It's a little bit difficult to tell what the actual cuts in OT are for this budget. There's a lot of different places with a lot of different numbers. I see specifically on 9.3, there's $246,500 in cuts to overtime. There's other places where there's more cuts. Then there's places where there's addition to overtime because of grants like Project Clean. Where in the net end of this budget, where are we on cuts to OT? So that's a two-part question. Where are we going to end this year, and where are we projected for next year?
Well, as far as this year, you know, our overtime numbers are down with regard to the amount of hours. Our overtime numbers are down with respect to the amount of hours on a fiscal year to date compared to fiscal year 18. We're down 5,363 hours. Primarily due to a reduction of almost 4,000 special event hours due to COVID-19. As you know, many special events were canceled this year, and I'll qualify that answer by saying that, you know, with the reductions in special events, we will not receive some of the revenue that some of those special events have brought forward. The two largest contributing factors to overtime for us is personnel shortage and completing assignment. Many of that is due to attrition within our department. Over the last 3 years, we have seen officer overtime reduce. We have seen our attrition rate at a pace of about 40 officers per fiscal year. So at this point, I can get back to you as to where we're going to end this year as far as relative to overtime.
I also want to note that that we have to understand that there is also a part of this that needs to be addressed, and that is what we are contractually obligated to do. There is a right to work that we have based on the contract with the Locust Club. So if you look at, you know, some people say, well, why is it that when you go to the Blue Cross Arena, you have to have a police officer, you know, that's crossing there? Well, these were things that were litigated many years ago. And so there, as it pertains to overtime, when we're doing certain things in our city, we have to use police officers, and because it's the right to work. So we also have to pay attention to what we are contractually obligated to do. I also want to make a note that we have, you know, the budget proposal that is before you already cuts the police budget by $3.6 million. So, you know, we have already made cuts to the police department. Now, you may, you know, specifically as it pertains to overtime, I think that that's a complicated question because, you know, there are grants that we do receive from both the federal government and the state of New York that truly are grants that specifically used for overtime. And so the chief can talk a little bit about those special details that that we are required to do through those grants that allows for overtime payment. And so those project impact grants, the information and the details that we've done on Clinton Avenue as it pertains to the opioid crisis and other details, there are a number of grants actually, you know, to the tune of probably over $1 million that we receive that also go towards paying for police overtime because that is specifically what the grant requires.
And to add to the mayor's point, we talk about give grants, and we talk about in the police department quite a bit about how those grants are not separated from our overtime allotment. This year, it's also hard to predict overtime as many municipalities across the country are dealing with pop-up protests that occur. I can tell you at this point right now, between the last 2 weekends, we are at about $400,000 in overtime expenditures due to trying to make sure that we protect the city and protect people's First Amendment right to protest. And as you know, these protests do pop up sometimes without very little forewarning.
Yeah, I guess my response to that would be that I think what we've learned over the last 2 weekends across the nation and here locally is that less police presence at these protests is oftentimes a good thing, understanding your need to protect the city, but also understanding that having huge police forces that draw up giant bills and overtime is not necessarily the way we want to go. But I actually want to take it a step back. So I hear Mayor Warren's point, and by the way, it should be noted several times during the course of the next hour that the police budget has already been cut by 3.6 million. I see that. I think that's an important thing to recognize. And with that, there's still some pretty significant investments in things that we want to see as a department, including a new class, which to me is another key reason why I don't understand why overtime wouldn't be cut even more dramatically. We should be seeing 51 new officers this year between the 38 of the new class and the 13 SROs moving over. I believe that part of the reason why last year I stood behind you, Mayor Warren, on your budget in terms of dynamic staffing with the fire department was in part because we recognize that by adding new classes, we can continue to have a strong service without any major reduction while also minimizing overtime hours. And I'd like to understand, how will these 51 new officers help us dramatically reduce overtime hours? Not incrementally, but dramatically.
I think that there is a difference in what, I think that you're comparing apples to oranges, council member, because as we look at the contract, you have to go back to the contract. So for example, if a police officer, and I'll go back to the Blue Cross Arena example because it's the best example, right? That's not part of their daily obligated work. So we have to pay overtime for them to come in and do that. There are schedules that we have to adhere to for every division and section of our police department. And so you have to look at the contract in order to understand exactly why the overtime is where it is at. Now, as the chief has already indicated, he stated that there is a significant reduction in overtime because of the reduction in special events. For all of those special events that we had officers for Park Avenue, Cornhill Festival, Puerto Rican Festival, all of those events that have been canceled, that is not people that are assigned to work that day. That's people that are coming in that we're bringing in additionally to cover the city and cover the special event. So we have to make sure that we are still responding to the calls for service, because that doesn't change when we have a special event. People are still calling 911 for service to their home or for some other reason. And then also on top of that, we have to staff the special event. And the special event would require for us to staff that with police officers because of the requirement in the contract.
That makes perfect sense to me. But still, this is the 1 year where we actually, I think, have an opportunity to really take out our pen and pencil and make some significant cuts to overtime, because we will never have less special events than this year. And Puerto Rican Fest is a great example. There was a lot of work done this year on how we're going to staff that better. And it's a shame that it's not going to be able to happen. And God willing, it is going to happen again next year. So I'm not saying this is a cut in perpetuity, but this year we're going to have no Red Wings games, no Puerto Rican Festival, and we're going to have 51 new officers. So if there's ever a year for us to be able to significantly reduce overtime, it should be this year. And I believe that is a best practice that we should follow in a year where we have to make some hard budget cuts.
To Councilmember Gruber, to add to the mayor's point, this year we will be reducing overtime by $265,000 as proposed in the budget, and we'll continue to look for ways to cut overtime. Also, I think what's important to note is that when we lose an officer to retirement, an officer doesn't backfill the next day. The academy is a 6-month process followed by a 4-month field training program. So this year we will have 38 new recruits start the academy in December of 2020. And then the academy will be over June 2021 for the 6-month duration. And then they will have to go through 4 months of field training. So we really won't see, I guess, the fruits of these 38 police officers coming through until late summer 2021. So it's not really a true, we're going to have 51 new bodies on the road, because in addition, we also have individuals who are continually retiring throughout that. So we never maintain a true total number of police officers at any, it takes about 1 year to backfill a police officer when they do leave.
Fair enough. At minimum, we have 13 new members from the SRO transfer, and we.
You're on mute. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, I muted myself. We have 13 new SROs transferring over to patrol, to the Community Affairs Bureau, or to patrol, pardon me. And on top of that, we also just had a conversation with emergency services in 911, and there does seem to be a direct correlation between being able to add staff members and being able to reduce overtime. And again, I can't stress it enough. I know that there's a lot of conversation right now going on at a national level. I'm not talking about that at this particular moment. I'm sure some of my colleagues will, and I probably will later too. Right now, it is about doing what's right in a budget where we know we have to make hard cuts. Last year, the overtime budget was at $7 million. Chief, you said you'd help get it down towards $6 million. I'd like to know how low we think we'll be able to get it without that many special events and with 13 new SROs this year.
Councilmember, I cannot give you an estimate. I just can't. When you're dealing with public safety, things pop up, things arise, retirements occur, personnel shortages happen, vacations, sick, all those things occur and they have to be taken into account. So I just can't give you a number as to where we're going to end up.
Okay, that's a conversation I'd like to keep having.
Additionally, I just want to add to what the chief is saying, because you have to also consider vacation time. You have to consider a number of different factors. It's not just a one for one. We'll go back and we'll take a look at it. And just because something is budgeted doesn't mean necessarily that it's spent. I think that for us, we want to make sure that we have the dollars allocated just in case we need them. So for example, the protests that happened over the last 2 weekends, they weren't necessarily planned. And so, we had to bring in officers. We had to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their First Amendment right, that we were able to clear traffic, that we were able to do the things that we needed to do. You have to have resources in the budget to be able to do so. So just because it's budgeted doesn't mean that it's going to be used. Now, as it pertains to special events, a number of our special events, yes, they have been canceled. We left the dollars there because at some point in time, we were talking to some of the event planners that wanted to do something later in the year. And so we didn't want to take away the dollars from that. And then later on in the year, they come back and say, oh, well, we wanted to do a week of jazz festival and it wasn't budgeted for, it wasn't planned. And so just because it's budgeted doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be spent.
Understood. I only reiterate that I think this is a year to look at that even closer, but I appreciate your commitment to do so.
Councilman, if I could just add, I wanted to mention that, in addition to what you've been talking about here, the police department is going to start the year with 13 sworn vacancies. So that, even though we've got the SROs, shifting over, remember, there were only a handful of SROs that worked at the district over the summertime. So the police department had them for, to be able to use in some capacity, over the summer. But they are short 13 vacancies, going into the summer, which is a peak period for them. So that's another concern.
Okay, Councilmember Gruber, I can come back to you. Let's move on to Councilmember Patterson, and then after that, Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chief and everybody. Good to see you guys all. So just start with just some of the basics here, because I don't know if everybody knows it, especially the folks at home. So how many police patrol car beats are there?
37.
Okay, 37 police patrol car beats. And those car beats are broken up into patrol sections?
Correct.
And how many patrol sections are there?
5.
5 patrol sections, all right. Now back to car beats. What percentage of our car beats average are fully staffed every day?
I would say all of our car beats are fully staffed each and every day.
So 100% of all, so 100% of the car beats are staffed every day for the entire, okay, that's one question. Are they all staffed every day for the entire day?
Yes. Yes, a car is staffed within that car beat. You know, an officer may leave and go back another officer up outside of that car beat,
Okay.
but an officer is assigned to a car beat each and every day.
So every car beat in the Northeast, in Clinton section, sorry, every car beat in Clinton section, every day, there's an officer in there. And how many car beats are there in Clinton section?
10.
So there are minimum 10 officers on the road in cars every day in the Northeast.
Correct. Correct. A minimum of 10. We typically have more than 10, and maximum maybe 20, 21.
Oh, good to hear. And so is that true for all of the other sections?
Yes, all the other sections do have car beats that have officers assigned to every single car beat. In addition, sometimes with an overflow of officers.
All right, thank you. So roughly how many officers is that per day that are out working? Well, let me back up. How many shifts per day are working?
How many shifts? Well, Tuesday through Saturday, we have 4 platoons that work. We have the day shift, the evening shift, the afternoon shift, and the overnight shift. We have a 4 platoon component in there. Sunday, Mondays, our 4 platoons do not work. Our 4 platoon is 7 at night to 3 in the morning.
Okay, so 3, so all right. Roughly how many officers is that on average per day that we have assigned and working?
I can get back to you with a specific number.
Okay. How many sworn patrol officers are there?
728.
That's specifically patrol?
No, in patrol, we have 500 officers assigned to the Operations Bureau.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, so I direct you now to pages 9-18, patrol sections. I'd like you to define some terms here. We have critical calls for service, urgent calls for service, normal calls for service. What is a normal call for service?
So I can, so a critical call for service. Notes here. So critical cause for service will be anything that's violent in nature. A normal cause of service would require an in progress call. And what was the other one?
Urgent. You got critical, which is anything that's violent in nature.
Violent in nature.
Urgent.
Call in progress. And a normal would be any job where there is no violence that is present. Sort of like a report. Criminal mischief report, family trouble report.
Okay, no violence. And urgent is again what, sir?
A violent call in progress. Where there's a threat to, life or public safety.
Okay, all right. And the discretionary call is officer sees something, he stops and checks it out.
Correct.
All right.
Non-discretionary would be similar to a family trouble.
Okay, okay. So I now direct you over there to page 919. At the bottom, response time. From the 2018 actual to the budgeted 2021 budget year, we are looking at increases in response time. Can you talk about that in general?
Sure. We have body worn cameras, and which allows an officer to take a little more time. We also talk about procedural justice, having an officer on a call and taking their time answering one call at a time. It's about providing that customer service to the citizens of Rochester, which may take a little more time. The investigative techniques that we have using managing criminal investigations requires officers to conduct neighborhood checks, solvability factors. There's many surveillance equipment on private businesses as well as our blue light cameras. So officers are tasked to conduct a more thorough investigation as they're out in patrol. So that can lend to some of the increased time that it may take with the technology that we have and the technology that's out there.
All right, so I must be misunderstanding this, so help give me some clarification. So I thought response time meant that's how long it took from the time it was dispatched to the time the officer got to the call. That's not what that means?
No, it's time from when the call comes into 911, from the time that the officer arrives on scene.
Okay, so, all right, so 911, officer goes to 911, and from the time that it goes to 911 to the time the officer gets there, we're looking at in 2018, 14.2 minutes. Budgeted for this year, we're looking at 15.2 minutes. Okay, so that's for the critical. So urgent response call then is we've already got an officer there. It's ongoing violence. Is that 18 minutes? Is that an officer calling for some additional help, or what is that?
The 18 minutes can go from the time that a call comes into 911, right? When someone makes a 911 call, it goes into the emergency communications department. And the emergency communications ask questions about certain things. But the average time for an officer to arrive on scene is a little over 5 minutes, depending on where they are at in the city. And it also depends on the call volume that we are taking within the city.
Okay, well, okay, but, and I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but the critical calls for response is violent in nature, the officers heading there. The critical call for services violent in nature. The urgent call for services, you got violence in progress. And so why would the urgent be a greater time? So help me understand why the urgent is going to be a longer period of time than the critical.
Urgent call is not a violent call in progress.
Okay.
And I'm gonna turn it over to Nick Petiti to explain.
Find my unmute button. So I can clarify a couple of things. A critical call for service is at the time as it's known to the dispatcher that it would be an in-progress call with potentially a weapon type or some sort of violence in progress. A urgent call is essentially another call that's in progress that doesn't have a violent component predominantly as categorized by the call for service response category. And then a normal call for service response is every other call. Now, when we talk about response times, this is a question we get very frequently. Things like, you mean to tell me it'll take 15 minutes to get to my critical response if I get shot? What's really difficult when you talk about calls for service is you have to separate what's known when you get there and what's known from the dispatcher at the time that it gets dispatched out.
Okay.
Calls for service categories are general buckets. So things like customer trouble, family trouble, and neighbor trouble dominate our calls for service response categories. But a customer trouble could be anything from this guy won't leave my store to I just got robbed at gunpoint. There are it's very skewed towards this guy won't leave my store than it is to the robberies. So when that gets relayed, because they're general categories, an officer is going to know, even though it's in a critical category, that it's an in progress and it's a customer trouble. He's going to know whether, or he or she will know whether or not there's a weapon involved or there is some other reason to get there faster. There are more of those jobs, disproportionately more of those jobs than the ones that everybody usually uses when they think of critical. Somebody shot on the street, somebody stabbed, a rape in progress. Those are the ones that people conjure up when they think of the critical category. But realistically, these are very general buckets that get relayed to the officer.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. That's it for now.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. I'd just like to go to your department highlights that you have on page 1 and go back to talk more about the police academy class that's upcoming. You mentioned there's 38 recruits. I'd like to know how many of those recruits are women and minority.
Councilmember Harris, we are in the process of selecting that class. So we have not finalized the makeup of the classes yet. So we are currently in the process of doing backgrounds and psychological exams on that class. So we don't have a makeup class yet.
Okay. And then the other thing I'd like to, it's on the same page that my question will be. When it comes to the patrol section investigation, can you describe that? What do you mean by that in this section? How you will enhance and improve? What is the plan?
So what we did was we centralized our patrol section investigators. We took all our investigators and put them under one unit and to kind of categorize and focus on pattern-based crimes, violent crimes in nature, non-fatal shootings, burglaries. We increased the supervision over that unit and provided a more of a team model approach when conducting investigations. We tried to model the major crimes unit who had a successful closure rate. And what the unit also does is weekly case reviews conducted by the captain. We assigned 2 lieutenants to that unit who supervises the number of investigators that we have. Non-fatal case reviews are also conducted, and we have an officer coordinator who communicates with the section coordinators within the section. So it's providing more accountability when it comes to conducting thorough investigations. We're taking investigations a lot further when we do have those non-fatal shootings that occur, and we're conducting warrants on many of the follow-up investigations that we have. So we're pleased, although we're in the 6-month phase of this investigation. It's been implemented since 6 months. January of this year, we started it. And I think we have seen some fruits of our labor thus far. We are still continuing working on the analysis piece of such, and so far so good at this point.
Thank you, Chief Singletary. I'm very impressed. Thank you, and I'll keep looking forward to if you could keep us posted on the data as you get the analysis information in. My final question, at least for now, is we received notice that the school resource office program has been discontinued. Some of the resources discontinued by the city school district. So as a result, there's been a discontinuing in our budget as well. Will those officers lose pay? What will happen to their pay when they go back to their normal position or their previous positions?
So those officers will still be employed by the city of Rochester and paid by the city of Rochester, and those officers will be assigned to conduct patrol duties within our operations bureau. So they will still be paid by the city of Rochester. As you know, part of their salaries were reimbursed by RCSD, but the city of Rochester will be taking up the cost of the salaries.
Okay, so that means that, just follow up with that, that means that instead of us getting a portion of that pay subsidized by the city's school district, we'll have to incur those costs this upcoming budget.
Correct.
Okay. Do you have a figure on how much that is total?
It's like $1.2 million. I can get you $1,246,000.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for now. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ortiz, and then Councilmember Pio.
All right, thank you. I have a question on this year's amended budget, or when I say this year's, the one that we're in now, versus what was actual and estimated for this past year. Can you tell me what was what was driving the huge steep increase from the amended versus actual and even the estimated for 1920? Looks like 2.39 million versus the actual from the year before, and 1.79 million the amended versus the estimated of this year. What was driving that steep increase?
I think a major driver of the steep increase was grants received within the department. As we and the mayor talked about earlier,
Okay.
We receive a number of grants within our department to complement the operating budget.
Okay, so all that huge increase was all grants.
Yes.
Okay. The other question that I have is, Chief, how do you determine the appropriate number of individuals per level? So when I look at the listing here of when you get to, let's say, administration, if you will, sergeants, lieutenant, captain, and so on, how do you determine a right number of individuals, or is it they've been here long enough, they've taken the test, therefore they can be promoted? I'm all for advancement, so don't get me wrong, but I am curious as to how do you make that determination for levels in terms of number of individuals that can be at that level?
I think one of the things that we look at is span of control. How many supervisors can adequately supervise officers or subordinates? And we also look at the workload. You know, the work in investigations may be totally different than the work in patrol. An officer who may supervise, a sergeant who may supervise 8 officers who are in a patrol function, the workload will be different from a sergeant who works in investigations who may be supervising a number of investigators. The workload can be totally different when you try to compare the two. So the biggest thing that we look at is span of control.
Okay. I'm sure I have a deeper question there, but I'm gonna let that go because it's hard to understand exactly how all that works when you're not in it every single day. But okay, thank you. So the other question that I have, and then I'll let my colleagues jump in here, is obviously there was a lot of conversation in the beginning here in terms of national climate and things locally occurring here. But considering all of that and our own local incidences that we've had throughout the years, and I recognize that we have tried to be as responsive as possible with all of the things that we've done up to this point. But are there additional things that, as things continue to, the discussions continue to happen, that you are considering and reviewing as potential changes within your influence or span of control? What types of things are you looking at and considering?
Thank you for that question. And we are always looking at ways to kind of improve and to make sure that we don't see some of the atrocities that we've seen around the country pertaining to law enforcement. One of the things that we've done is increase transparency. You know, we have all of our general orders, policies, and procedures on the RPD open data portal, which we try to tout each and every day. One thing is training. You know, we can always get better at training. We conduct implicit bias training, procedural justice, blue courage training. One of the other things that we talk about is compassion. You know, having officers is part of procedural justice is having officers have compassion, understanding why we get caught at certain events, why things are taking place. Cultural sensitivity, cultural competency. This class, if it were not for COVID, we have 17 recruits that just hit FTO, field training, this week. One of the things that we wanted to implement was at the end of the academy, we have post-academy where we have recruits go to IBERO, Action for a Better Community, the Jewish Federation, and things of that nature to understand the cultural awareness issues in Rochester. But COVID-19 kind of slowed that process up. Bringing subject matter experts in to mitigate atrocities that we've seen around the country goes back to training. The diversity. You know, we always try to, when we talk about recruitment, you know, I just put a second officer in recruitment. We have 2 Hispanic officers in recruitment right now, and they're aggressively going out there to try to recruit individuals so our department is more reflective of our community. And it's just not ethnicity, it's about ideas and thoughts as well. Dialogue, continue to work with our partners. We have a good working relationship with many of our partners in Rochester. I think that's why we haven't seen some of the issues that we've seen in other police departments across the country. The vast majority of Rochesterians support the Rochester Police Department. That's because of the work we've been doing the last couple of years. When I became deputy chief in 2018, the mayor tasked me with creating a community policing plan, and I had to have that to her within a couple of months. And that's what we did. We created the Community Affairs Bureau. Everything that kind of interfaced with the community, we housed under one umbrella. She gave me the opportunity to add resources to that bureau. We always talk about those buzzwords, community policing, but whose job really is it to come up with a strategy to do community policing? And over the last year and a half, we have done that. We have extended the olive branch. One of the things that we're also working on is peer-to-peer counseling, officers taking care of one another. You know, if an officer is having a bad day, you should be able to tap your partner out and say, I got this one, I got the next one, because you may see something going on. So that's about the accountability piece and recognizing when someone is off their game. Some of the conversations I've had with some of the council members have been trauma-informed care. recognizing that some of the actions that we do as police officers, how does it impact people and the long-lasting impacts? And we become adaptable to the environments that we're in and determining a path forward after a crisis, similar to what we're seeing right now. And I've had many people in this community, based on relationships that I've established, that have reached out to me who want to help, who want to repair, who want to, I guess, shorten the divide that we have, that we may have here in Rochester. But again, that divide is not as great as other cities because of the work that we've been putting in. And the other part is civil service system. The civil service system, I think it's antiquated. It's one of the things that me and my team are looking at to come up with ways that we can kind of come up with different things that we can kind of do to help promotion, hiring, and those things, and working with the city of Rochester as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that and the review that you're doing internally. I would, at least for myself, love to see an actual, I don't know if it's a request list, a wish list, or whatever, in what format, but I think it's very important to hear from you all in terms of the kinds of things, because you're not blind to the issues that are out there. And so I want to hear also from our folks within RPD what they feel are the best things that would help them as a force, right? In terms of the changes that we can all make. And you said one of them, civil service. That's a huge lift. I think there are some definite changes we need to make there. What does that look like for you all, and how we can all do some of these things together? I feel like a lot of this conversation is us against them. And I know that all of you feel that there are some solid things that you feel that you can stand behind as well. So what do those things look like so we can be saying them in a singular voice?
Gotcha.
Thank you. Councilmember Pio and then Lupian.
Thank you. So you touched on it really quickly, Chief, on my next question here. Now, as many as you know, my stepdad is a retired police officer from Rochester Police Department. And one of the things I respected most about him was that he grew up on Earl Street, lived on Earl Street while he was a police officer, and he's retired and still lives on Earl Street. So my question on that is, how are we purposely targeting city residents in order to get them to join the police force so that they can be part of the community while also protecting the lives of their community?
So one of the things that I did, and like you said, I touched on it earlier, was add a second person to recruitment. I think a department this size, 700 plus individuals, we need a second person to go out there and aggressively recruit, particularly in the climate that we're in right now. We know it's going to be hard to recruit, but that does not mean that we pack up our bags and go home. We work harder and come up with innovative ideas. One of the things that we do is we continue to work with communications within the city of Rochester, the communications department. We are out there on social media, radio, print, and digital networks, constantly on WDKX. Even though we have 2 members who are in the recruitment unit, every person within the Rochester Police Department, all 728, should be positive agents of change within our organization, those individuals who are recruiting. We also have partnered with RTS at times to come up with billboards on buses. And as you know, we reached out to colleges, our churches, work with organizations like Noble, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We also look at practices that are out there as well. We worked with LAPS, Latino Advancement of Public Safety. So we have worked with many community partners, and part of our social media platform is we highlight police officers out there to let people know that this still is a noble profession, right? We want people from the community. Men in Law Enforcement Mondays we've done, Women in Law Enforcement Wednesdays, Fitness Fridays, Friendship Fridays, where we introduce our officers to the community. Another thing that we do is the Police Recruit Education Program project. We work with MCC, with our cadets. Our Career Pathways of Public Safety program with the Rochester City School District. So it's important for me that we continue to maintain a relationship with our youth. One of the reasons why I became a police officer was because of my 5th grade DARE teacher. So it wasn't just about drug abuse resistant education. It's about, the relationship that we establish with individuals and understanding, we have to be a walking billboard each and every day that we're out there and establishing context with our residents.
Additionally, I want to also make note of the Pathways to Public Safety Careers program that we also do with the Rochester City School District. The program is something that we've done for a number of years, and it's not just with the police department, it's the fire department, it's 911, as well as rural metro services. Actually, one of your council members is the person that is the coordinator for that. So we are reaching out to our students while they're in high school. We've had some trouble over the last couple of years with recruitment and getting in the classroom early. But this is something that I have spoken with the prior superintendent about. And it's something that Dr. Myers and I are talking about, because I think that this is a great program that gives our young people a step in the right direction, but it also gives them an opportunity to, in the 9th and 10th grade, explore all different types of public safety careers, and then to, in their 11th and 12th grade, really concentrate on a particular career that they want to go into. And we've been able to train a number of our young people that, have many of them, when they graduate, the program has, I believe, about a 97% graduation rate. The council president usually attends the graduation, but we graduate about 30 students a year from that program in every facet of public safety. And we also recruit from that program. We want to get more young people involved. And that's a partnership that we have to cultivate with the city school district. But we're hopeful that that will also be a tool that can continue to be utilized on a more frequent basis to recruit actually city residents, people that were born and raised in a city, educated in a city, to now come and police the city.
Excellent. Something I personally would love to see too is outreach for the veteran community. I would love to see more veterans on our police force as well. But my next question, really quickly, I see a lot of increase in numbers that are very disturbing. In particular, the firearms seized and the numbers of rape crimes that are cleared are very, in my opinion, super low. So do we have the proper software in order to aggregate that data with the state and counties so that we have better communication with all the information that they have in case those numbers seem to, increase? Do we have access to that data to be able to combine it on one system so that you have access to what the state sees to what the federal government might see? Is that software available? Do we have it right now?
So I think we have many things in place right now. We have a Morrow Crime Analysis Center that is kind of the hub of Morrow County, and many law enforcement agencies around Morrow County contribute to that analysis center. So we share information. We work with our partners, with the Sheriff's Office, the New York State Police, our federal partners, to try to get some of that information. I would also note that if you see an uptick in guns, it's because we are taking a lot of guns off the street. I think the last 2 weeks of May, we took 31 total firearms off the street. Some of these guns that were seized were also done in gun buyback programs that we have done. I think the 2019 calendar year, we did 3 gun buyback programs. And in this fiscal year, we did 2. If you look at the fiscal year of 1920. So yes, we are taking a lot of guns off the streets. We are arresting a lot of people. But yes, so to answer your question, we are working with those partners and we do have the resources in place.
Excellent. Thank you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Number Lucian, and then Vice President Lightfoot.
Good afternoon. So I have a number of questions. I'll try and get through them quickly. I have 3 to ask where you can, I'd like for you to respond, and then the rest I'll just kind of read into the record. So in terms of overtime, in a report, I think from 2017, 2018, some of the officers earned as much as $56,000 in overtime pay. And just wondering, what's the rate and how many hours would that represent?
Well, the average overtime rate is about $79.
An hour?
Yeah, about $79 an hour, correct. And what was the part of your,
Additionally, there's, as I said to Councilmember Gruber, there is some contractual obligations that you all have to review that determine who can work overtime. So there's a process by which the city has to follow by law and by contract that dictates who can work overtime. And so if you see numbers of different individuals making a significant amount of money, it is because of the fact that we are contractually obligated, if that person wants to work, for that person to be allowed to work overtime.
And Councilmember Lupien, I gave you the special event overtime rate. I'm sorry, $79 is about the special event overtime.
So there are different rates for different functions, like for the protest, for example, how much would that overtime rate be?
Every officer is at a different rate, like the mayor said, based on a collective bargaining agreement. So an officer makes different than what a sergeant may make, a lieutenant may make, a captain may make when it comes to overtime. And that's all because of collective bargaining agreements.
Okay, and then I think this question has already been answered. Do they need permission before working overtime, or because they're right to work? They do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. My next question, do departments perform any kind of, well, you kind of answered this too, right? In a racism training, you talked about implicit bias. Is that one class? Is it several? Is it just for the new recruits? You know, do we go back and train officers that came up before this was instituted?
So yeah, so each person coming into the academy receives implicit bias training, procedural justice training, and we have in-services twice throughout the year that we can, as a command staff, pick the topic based on what's going on around the country, based on what we're seeing in our department. So yes.
So would you be able to say, like, do you keep track of who in your department hasn't had the training?
Yes. So for every training, it's always cataloged with regard to who has not received the training. Yes, we do keep training records.
Okay. Is that something that you'd be able to provide us?
You want like in specific?
You want the number?
The number of officers who have not received implicit bias training.
Yes, we can get you that information.
Thank you. My next question is about, I've heard that there's a database of suspected gang members. Is that something that is maintained by the RPD?
We do have information that we write field information forms, and that we do categorize certain information. Yes.
If so, what's the criteria for being added to the database, and can people find out if they are in it, and if so, what's the process for being removed from it?
Well, I mean, it's categorized within. I mean, it's based on information, that intelligence that we gather from individuals that we on the street or other crimes that they have been connected with. With regards to being removed from the database, I mean, it's just a list that we have.
Mm-hmm. So they'd have to have committed a crime and not just been, you know, identified by someone as a gang member?
Repeat the question.
So if it's suspected gang members, maybe they haven't committed a crime yet, and they're on this list.
Some are self-reported with regard to social media, but I'm going to turn it over to Nick Petiti, who is our Office of Business Intelligence Coordinator, who categorizes as such.
Hello. I'll just clarify a couple things. There is a gang database that is collected and captured in the Monroe Crime Analysis Center, which is a task force that RPD is part of. It is a federally compliant 28 CFR 23 intelligence database that has an established criteria that we can provide for you on how qualifying events come, what the criteria is for individual inclusion, what the thresholds are for association versus membership, and there is purge controls based on the criteria.
That would be really helpful if you could provide those things. Thank you.
Sure.
The next couple of questions I'll just read because they're more, I know you won't be able to answer them right now. One is how much has been spent in the tactical response specifically for Black Lives Matter rallies? And for Gray Key, the use of that technology, could you provide for the last year, the list of warrants for the use of that technology and their results, including the evidence found, whose phone was searched, whether it was the victim, the suspect, or the witness, and the type of crime, and if there was a second warrant granted for info found on the phone. In terms of makeup of the force, how many officers are of color, are city residents, or former military with positions and higher dates? What have been the clearance rates broken down by types of crime over the past 5 years? And the last one, in terms of the recruitment class, are we still under the federal consent decree that mandates 25% of our recruit class be diverse? And could you provide the racial and gender diversity of the recruit class for the last 3 years? And with that, I am done.
Yes,
Okay.
we can do that.
All right, thank you. Vice President Lightfoot.
Thank you, Chairman Evans. I'll start off with the body worn cameras, Chief. The training around body worn cameras, can you explain training and or compliance to the body worn cameras?
Yes, so back in 2016 is when we implemented our body worn camera program. The training consisted of an 8-hour block where trainers came in and trained officers to utilize the proper function of the body worn camera. We have a 96% rate of officers complying with the body worn camera, and that can go into a myriad of different things with regard to an officer, forgetting to turn the camera on, or an officer, not having footage for whatever particular reason. But the rate has been about 96.4%, I believe.
So 96.4%. So what do you do? What is the discipline that's giving for officers who are not complying? That 0.6%.
Well, what we do is we do a internal analysis as to what occurred. When it brought to our attention, it can range from progressive discipline. It can range anywhere from a verbal reprimand. It can range from an orange card. It can range from a letter reprimand, depending on the officer's history and how many times the officer may not have turned on the body worn camera. I can tell you that officers have received verbal reprimand. I have suspended officers for not turning the camera on.
Okay, is the report or the data that you're referring to, is it possible for us to get that data for the compliance of the body worn cameras, please?
Correct. It's also on the open data portal as well.
Is it on the open data port? Okay, very good. Okay, my next question is around because training, being 20 years on the fire department, I know and in time in the military, training. I mean, that ultimately what makes us better at what we do. And of course, what makes your officers better at what they do. I agree with my colleagues about the trauma-informed care training. I would hope that in this budget that we could begin to look at training that is more specific around the recent events that are happening across our country. I know that the police department is also heavily involved with racial equity and leadership change teams within the police department. And I know that we're looking at all of our, not just the police department, but all of our departments, policies, practices, and procedures with a racial equity lens, and if they have adverse impact of people of color. So I would hope that within your change teams that you guys are looking at your training and can you just speak to is there any equity or anti-racism training that goes on within your department?
Yes. So earlier I talked about the implicit bias training that we went through that's actually required by DCJS, Department of Criminal Justice Services in New York State. We talked about that. We also talk about ways that we can kind of recruit, hire, and promote within our department, working within the current system that we have of the civil service system to kind of make sure that we are intentional when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equality at all levels. So one of the things that we continue to do is work with our partners, as the mayor said earlier, our PrEP program, Career Pathways of Public Safety, to make sure that we have sort of like a pipeline and bridging the gap and informing individuals about the notoriety of the police department. So that's one thing that we can do, civil service process. One other thing that we're doing when it comes to the hiring process is the deputy chiefs and the commander are taking a good look and taking a deep dive into the background process. We know that there may be some inequalities with the number of individuals who may be eliminated from background processes. And what we've done with this background process is the deputy chief and the commander have been personally involved with regard to the elimination of candidates to become police officer. The final review has to go through them. We also research opportunities to possibly present to the Civil Service Commission, as I said earlier, and we continue to work with our community partners like Noble, LAPS, and things of that nature. And that is the second person recruitment. We also send officers to seminars around the country to see what departments are doing with regard to best practices and see what we can kind of implement here. And I also think it's important to see what other departments are doing to quite frankly, if they're not doing things, so we don't implement them here, things of that nature. And like you said earlier, we're working with the Real Initiative team and Dr. Cephas Archie as well.
Okay, Chief, when it comes to youth, because I know there was a lot of conversation about the youth and creating the Pathways of Public Safety program, creating, which I'm a big component of, trying to expose our youth to career pathways. I think that's good, you know, but at the same time, I noticed in the budget, it talks about focusing well-being of city youth and people working collectively with various departments and commands. But then I also see that there is a portion in our, one second, wait, please, our portion where the youth services unit has been eliminated, and therefore critical process related to that unit have been eliminated. Can you express how are we meeting these youth when looks like we're eliminating the youth services unit?
Yes. So as you know, the opportunity to build bridges with youth does not stop and end at the school door. So because we're moving the school resource officers from the school does not mean that our relationships with youth end. We have the Rochester Police Explorer program, which I was a part of growing up as a kid, you know, which wanted me to become a police officer. We still have that program that's alive and well. We have our cadet program. We have our Career Pathways of Public Safety program. And each and every contact that the 700+ police officers make with the youth is an opportunity for us. So yes, the school resource officer program is going to be proposed to be eliminated within the budget, but that does not necessarily mean that we are going to stop building bridges with our youth in our community. About 2 years ago, the mayor afforded me the opportunity to create the Youth Public Safety Council that we're working with that organization. And I have 10 members from the community who meet with me once a month. We talk about issues. The last meeting that we had last month was surrounding some of the issues that we see around the country, to include right here in Rochester. So I wanted youth to have a voice and be able to meet with top level leadership within the police department. And each of those youths are live within a certain part of the city. So it's to reflect the public safety committee, sort of similar to the city council. So we still have opportunities.
This may be a question for the budget director, but as removing the SROs, which I'm in agreement with, is there a savings to that? Does that save us additional dollars?
Not really, because what happens is we had a revenue coming over from the school district, right? So we were, and the revenue, you know, covers cost of the salary plus benefits. It never really addressed the cost of equipment, the vehicles, et cetera. So, you know, we lose the revenue, you know, but we, you know, effectively, you know, retain the expense. So we're not subsidizing, you know, someone who's working over at the district anymore, but it's not really resulting in a cost savings for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. No, I understand. I got it. Now, Chief, I ask this every year, and I'm going to ask it again because it's probably one of the most complaints that I receive from citizens is our open air drug markets. In this budget, how are we addressing that? Do we, I would love to see some type of plan around, I know there was a study done some years ago, way before I came on council, that talked about the uninterrupted drug markets. I'm not saying that's the case now. However, we do know that there are pockets in our area that consistently throughout the years, and I mean decades, seem to be the hot spots for uninterrupted drug markets that we consistently see in our community. Is this budget going to address some of those that, I consider them literally eyesores within our community? And some people feel to some degree in siege within their community from these drug markets that are happening within our community. And everybody knows where they are and everybody knows what's going on, but what's the plan within this budget? Is that, how are we going to address that?
So one of the ways that we choose to address it is through covert opportunities and overt opportunities, high visibility patrols when it comes to the, high visibility patrols out there, officers stepping out with people in the street. We have our granite teams, our special investigation sections to focus on individuals in areas that we know where we can conduct covert details. We use blue light cameras that are a great investigative tool for us once something occurs within those neighborhoods. I also understand that, it's about quality of life for many individuals in these neighborhoods, and also to maintain a quality of life to address many of the problems that we see. We have worked in combined units with our tactical special investigation section and worked with our DA's office to talk about charges that we can kind of bring with regard to conspiracy. And we also work with our federal partners as well. So there's many covert opportunities that we have. There's many overt opportunities that we have. And also we rely on individuals from the community as well. Yes, you have talked about it in the past, and you have talked about it with regard to come up with a specific plan. And it's always an ongoing thing for us, not just around the budget crisis, but it's an ongoing thing that we pay attention to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam President, President Scott.
Yes, thank you. Chief, what would be your estimate as to the percentage of individuals who are who have mental health issues that are factoring into the arrests or the encounters that you're having?
Well, if I don't know, I wouldn't render a guess to it, but I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot, and I think there are many factors that play into it, whether it's poverty, whether it's a number of issues that tend to it. We train our officers, and I work very closely with Kim Butler from the Office of Mental Health, and we have been working with the NAMI. One of the things that we wanted to do this year around May, centered around Mental Health Awareness Month, was have community forums in each quadrant of the city. And I worked with the National Association of Mental Alliance to try to have these forums throughout the city, talk about what it's like when you call 911 and why is the dispatcher asking questions to inform the officer upon responding. I know that there are many people in the community who often do not want to call the police because they're fearful of the outcome that may result. So we have a crisis intervention team within our department. A majority of our officers are trained in crisis intervention techniques when dealing with individuals who are mentally ill, suffer from mental illness. But I would say I would not want to render a guess as to an exact percentage, but I know it's a great deal of individuals.
Is there still the position or the officers who are trained specifically to respond to a call when in the call they say that there is likely a mental illness issue?
Yes, that's our crisis intervention team.
Oh, okay.
We work very closely with the Office of Mental Health as well. And they have the forensic intervention team, our FIT team, who really takes a deeper dive of individuals who may not be in forms of crisis, But even when they're not in a crisis, that may be sometimes the best opportunity to talk to them.
Hmm. And how do we, you talked about in terms of the mental health of officers, of staff. You talked about peer-to-peer counseling and people sort of looking out for each other and all of that. But how much farther does that go? What's in place to look out for that, to screen for that, to recognize the level of stress and stuff that the officers are under that may impact the way they interact with people?
So one of the things that accountability, you don't have to be a supervisor to be accountable to your fellow officer. So it's about watching out for each other. We also have, when officers go through critical incidents, an officer may be involved in a shooting or another critical incident, we have our officer assistance program that can kind of come out. I started a relationship about 1.5 years ago with the Flower City chaplains, where they're concerned about officer wellness. We also have our clergy response team, who is always available to kind of come in and talk to officers about any issue that we may have. We also have many officers who are heavily involved with their church and chaplaincy. As you know, many departments across the country went through suicides. So that's part of officer wellness as well, because if our officers are not well, they cannot go out there and take care of the community. So mental health awareness is huge across the department, as we're finding that many issues are arising in law enforcement. So suicide prevention is key. And one of the things that we're looking to do here in RPD is take it off the ground is the peer-to-peer counseling.
And is there training for that, or people just volunteer to be a buddy, or how does that work?
Yes, there is training for it, because we certainly want to have people have the skills for such, right? There is training for that. We have been researching some of that training. We have wanted to start it at the academy level and to take it all the way through. It's about building those relationships within, because we know that individuals within the academy also suffer from stress, mental health, because academy is not easy. And the individuals who go through the academy, sometimes we find those individuals drop out of the academy because sometimes they may not be able to talk to someone about what they're going through. So we are trying to set those peer-to-peer relationships within the academy as well as throughout the organization. I mean, you could be doing this job for 20 years and still have issues and that you have seen and go through traumatic experiences within our own organization. So mental health is always at first and foremost within our organization.
And just to go back briefly to the issue about the youth services, what led to the dismantling of that component?
Well, as you know, the Rochester City School District proposed in their budget to partially eliminate the SROs. Operationally, it just would not be feasible for us to do that, to continue the program with 7 police officers with that program. So we decided to propose that we eliminate the SRO program from the school district.
So the entry about the youth services program is referring to the SROs?
That is correct.
Okay. And it talks about working with other departments. What departments?
You mean like as far as creating relationships with youth? Drives, Department of Recreation and Youth Services. Commissioner Daniel Torres and I consistently work with those entities. Pathways to Peace, we work with SOY, but Pathways to Peace, Ray Mayolis, when he was in charge, him and I had great working relationships, and we utilized them to come out on many interventions with our youth.
Okay. All right, and just a couple more. What did you go over, or is it in the budget, our homicide closure rate?
Homicide closure rate?
Yes.
Yes.
I was looking for it. I didn't see it, so I don't know what it is or whether it's more or less than it was.
Is that page 919?
Yeah, 918. So 66.7%.
Good. All right. Great.
And that's,
thank you. Finally, Are you aware of whether or not there are any untested rape kits?
I'm sorry?
Are you aware whether or not there are any untested rape kits?
To my knowledge, we are all caught up to date with regard to untested rape kits. I know when I was deputy chief, there was an aggressive regulation that came down from the state to make sure that we were all caught up, and we did catch up. And right to my knowledge, there are no untested rape kits.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Two quick questions from me, Chief, and then I'll circle back for the second round for folks. I'll go to Harris and then Gruber. Can you, one of the things that I think breaks a lot of our hearts, and I've been watching the numbers, the number of overdoses actually seems to have spiked during COVID-19. And this problem is something that we're not going to rest our way out of. What can you talk about strategies, things that we're doing, but also things nationally that we can do to address this opioid epidemic? It's crazy. I mean, we know the number of deaths from opioids are much more higher than homicides. They don't get a lot of attention oftentimes because they're unintended deaths. So you hear about them through the grapevine, or you might know some people who were affected by it. And I know it's just not the police department that can do something about it, but what type of investments or things that do you think that we can do as a community on the front end to address this problem? I mean, it's nationwide, and yeah, and any thoughts on that?
So one of the things that we do is we partner with the Monroe County Heroin Task Force with the Sheriff's Office and many of our partners throughout to try to combat what you just talked about, the opioid epidemic. We also have the grant that we receive. We work with Ibero, Project Clean, where we're just not working with law enforcement. As you indicated, we're not going to rest our way out of the situation. So we're working with academia, other City of Rochester partners, law enforcement. The community is a big piece of it over there. And our business partners are on the ground. We have received grant funding to have additional patrols in that area, and also to take a deeper dive and working with some of our healthcare clinicians. I have taken part in many community forums where partners have come together to try to address what you're talking about. So those things are what we're kind of doing. And we're continuously looking at other areas. We looked earlier this year at Columbus, Ohio, to see what they did. And a lot of those, what we're finding is a lot of things that we're doing here and that we've seen in other studies, we're already doing them. We continue to work with organizations like Trillium, when we had the residents complaining in the area about the needle pickups. So we continue to work with those entities and the community partners. That's the only way that we're going to be able to solve this, as well as with the enforcement piece. The enforcement piece is one part of it. There's the education piece, and there's the collaborative piece that we're working with academia, City of Rochester, law enforcement, and the community as well.
Right, and I think someone touched on this earlier regarding illegal guns. Anything you can touch on that? I always get folks that say, listen, a lot of the guns are illegal, and they're arriving in this community often from other states who have looser gun laws. What strategies can we continue to try to put in place to get particularly illegal guns off the street?
One of the things that we do is we use our grant give gun involved violence elimination. It's a partnership between the DA's office, law enforcement, our partner sheriffs, and probation. We have swift, certain, and fair. We those individuals who are arrested, who are held accountable, and a judge sees all these individuals who are arrested for gun crimes. And so that's one piece of the accountability factor, that they're going in front of the same judge. Sometimes we arrest people who have been charged with criminal possession of a weapon more than one time. We work with our federal partners, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, to try to trace the guns to see where they're coming from. But there is no doubt there are a lot of guns that are out there on the street, in determining where they come from. And you're absolutely right when it comes to a lot of these guns come from other states who have relaxed gun laws with regard to such. Deputy Chief Morabito, is there anything that you want to add to that piece? Deputy Chief Morabito oversees the GIVE project.
Yeah, the other piece that we keep important is we NIBIN, which we do a federal registering of our guns so we can track that. And we do find that some of them come from some source states and cities, so we always follow through with those, which is important. And the other thing, just in the aspect of patrol, we have a focus in patrol to try and actively seek out gun toters, if you will, in our city. And then we try to take those cases as far as possible to also try and track it back to the source, how they're coming and where they're coming from and how they're getting to the city. So we have a kind of a holistic approach, both investigatively with the courts and with our patrol officers.
Thank you. And then I promise this will be my last one. I go on to others. And I think I heard this. NBD kind of had a unique program where new neighbors that moved into the area. So I think they were doing it with homeowners. They kind of sent them like welcome packets to the neighborhood and talked about how they welcome to the neighborhood. Here are the resources that are in your neighborhood. Does the police department participate in that with the neighborhood service centers in terms of welcoming newer people to the neighborhood and that type of thing? And I ask that because you hear a lot about that as being one of many tools in terms of building community relations with the police department. Touch on that a little bit.
Yes. So over last summer, COVID-19 kind of stopped a lot of things, but over the last summer, we did work with NBD, a neighborhood service center, our crime prevention officers on outreaches where we do go door to door and hand out literature with regard to what are the resources that are available between NSC, other city entities within the city of Rochester. So we did hand out bags, or we do hand out bags. A lot of times we've done outreaches when there has been a critical incident that occurred in a neighborhood, or many times it's just an outreach. It doesn't have to be a critical incident that occurred. When I say critical incident, it could have been a result of a homicide or anything that would have caused the neighborhood to have some sort of outreach. But many of our outreaches are proactive, and part of that does include handing out literature, let residents know what resources are available to them within the city of Rochester.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris and then Gruber.
Chief, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you have on section 933. You have listed there the New York State child seat. It ends at $2,900. I just wanted to know what was the reason for that. Are you guys ending the program, or is that just something for that particular year because of COVID?
So, where is it, 933? Okay. So that's a term of the grant.
Okay.
That's a term of the grant.
Are we planning to apply for a grant for the following year?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I have 4 questions. I'll try to make them quick and I'll be done for the section. The first is related to the Police Accountability Board. I understand, Chief, that you cannot control the Locust Club's suit against the PAB, but this year there will be an executive director in place and there will be a fully functioning board. And for that PAB to be effective, which, on the council side, we obviously have it in with the hope of it having some disciplinary authority, but even if not, the expectation is for you to be able to work with that executive director and board. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that? Do you plan on working with that board once there is an executive director hired?
Yes, I mean, I think the board has been established, and yes, I'll work with the board.
Okay, which leads me to my second question. I appreciate that, Chief. I want to be very clear. I appreciate that. That's a really important answer, and I'm sure the board looks forward to working with you. But the second question is about surveillance. So in 924, there's comments about how the special investigation section, has surveillance to be able to address different cases. And as you know, last month, when we passed the legislation involving Gray Key, there was a lot of questions about what the city's surveillance policy is. And I've done a good chunk of research, and the ACLU has done a lot of work on what appropriate and public surveillance policies are. And that seems to me to be a great place to be able to work with the PAB early to make sure that we all know and that there's a citizen voice in the development of the surveillance policy. Is that something that you would commit to working on with the PAB?
Many members of the PAB have reached out to me when I've been out and about. All of our surveillance policies are, within regulation. We don't violate anyone's civil rights with respect to conducting surveillance. I'm willing to work with the PAB.
And Chief, I want to be clear, I'm not accusing you of anything otherwise. I think in some cases, part of it is the shroud of secrecy and the opportunity to use the PAB as a civilian-led group that can actually make folks be able to recognize that what you're saying is true, and that our surveillance policies are smart and are strong and are meant to protect the public. That would be something that I think the PAB, especially with the new executive director, would be a great opportunity to work on a policy with that group.
And I also, I work with the Community Justice Advisory Board that works with Reverend Stewart, and there are many times where those issues do come up, and we have talked about those issues. We've met with the mayor, and they've met with the mayor and myself on those issues, and I meet with them quarterly to talk about such. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's about transparency, and many of our policies and procedures, as I stated earlier, are on the open data portal.
Right. And certainly folks should go check that out. Two last questions. Thank you for that, Chief. One of the really big things going on right now in this national moment talking about police reform is the militarization of police in terms of the gear and things like that. And again, I want to give a lot of credit to you and to Mayor Warren. I worked with both of you along with Councilmember Ortiz and VP Lightfoot, specifically in regard to this when it came to the Puerto Rican Festival. It's a shame we're not going to be able to bring some of that to fruition, but we all spoke collectively about how we want to make sure that the police presence at the Puerto Rican Festival is much less militarized, is not bringing the same type of gear that is huge and makes those loud noises. And we were all on board for that. Generally speaking, what I want to understand is how does the flow of funding, I understand some of that is federal dollars that comes for these big former military pieces of equipment. How does the flow of money for that work? Do you select the pieces of equipment that you want to purchase, or are they just things that come through the federal government?
Well, we get an opportunity to select the equipment that we purchase. We decide to spend federal dollars on. Some grants are tied to certain stipulations if we choose to take advantage of those grants, but we do have an opportunity to select certain pieces of equipment that come within our organization.
So are there things this year that you are planning on in the budget that you're planning on purchasing with federal dollars in terms of former military equipment?
This year, no.
Okay. Fantastic. I think that's a great thing to hear, especially in a year such as this one. And my last question is for the Community Affairs Bureau on 937. A lot of credit to you, Chief. I know this bureau is your baby, and DC Muro is doing a great job there. On 937, one of the objectives is specifically to provide post-academy curriculum to provide education on the cultural competencies of Rochester and the history of policing locally and nationally. This is really more of I guess it's a comment and a question. Again, I can't stress enough, this is the historian in me talking, that we are in the middle of a moment that is a true watershed national moment. We have never seen protests the way we have in back-to-back weekends like we have across the nation. I would hope that when you're talking about the history of policing, there is an opportunity to kind of weave in what's going on right now, weave in talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and potentially finding ways for some of those trainings to be with the Black Lives Matter organizations here in the city of Rochester. Have you put any thought into that at all?
Yes, I mean the climate that we're in right now, I think any law enforcement executive, to include me as chief, we have to be looking at our policy and procedures, seeing what training opportunities are available, and inviting people to the table to discuss what they kind of want to see and how they want to be policed. That was one of the things that was first and foremost in my mind when it came to the Community Affairs Bureau. We wanted to extend that olive branch. We wanted to have people have an opportunity to have a voice as to how they're policed. So yes, that's always first and foremost in my mind.
Thank you, Chief. I think that's something that we should absolutely develop some forums on that. I think that those will be great discussions that can only be helpful in terms of the transparent department that you're trying to build.
Thank you.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One of which I know that the animal services department is under the police department. I know that we've gotten grants for education in terms of helping people learn, know how to care for animals. Often we see individuals who need assistance. They take on animals and don't realize what exactly it all is entailed. I always say God bless anybody that has more than one dog, because they are a lot of work. They're like a baby. You gotta clean them. You gotta. And my kids have been begging me for a dog for a long time, and I keep telling them, look, you gotta walk them. You gotta clean them. They need shots. They get sick. Some of them have diseases that they need ongoing medication for. I mean, it is a major undertaking to have a pet. But most of us are politicians, and I always tell people, if you want a good friend, get a dog. How have we been doing? Because I know we've gotten a couple of grants from Petco and other places for these types of things around animal services. Does this budget address any of that? And are there other plans to be able to expand that type of thing? Because you know, they say a dog is a man or a woman's best friend, or if you're a cat person, whichever one. How are we addressing those issues, and what success have we had with some of the other grants that we've gotten? Petco, I know, and there was some other ones that we got.
I'm going to turn it over to the director, Chris Fitzgerald.
Hi, council members. Yeah, great question, and I appreciate the diplomatic answer with the or diplomatic wording with respect to cats. Yeah, so most of the grants we have received are geared towards, you know, building bridges and removing barriers and access to resources. So some of it helps with, you know, offsetting, subsidizing the cost of adoption fees to make pet ownership available to everybody, really as a marketing strategy, just to say, hey, there's a sale or a discount. But the other grants are geared towards helping out in the community. And really, like I said, you know, addressing barriers and access to resources. So whether that's information, which doesn't really cost us anything, or providing supplies or pet food or spay and neuter services. That's most of what our grants have been for. We continue to get them. I apply for the same, you know, handful of foundation grants every year, and I'll continue to do so.
Great, thank you. And then my last question, every year I get about 2 or 3 questions, Chief. And I know you were a DARE kid. I also was a DARE kid. I still remember the young officer that I had. His name was Officer Zlakis, and he ended up rising up through the ranks, but he probably was about 20-something years old when he would come into my 5th grade class and do DARE. So I had a couple of folks ask, what happened to DARE? Could DARE ever be brought back because of the opioid epidemic and other things that we've seen? I know that there was DARE was kind of similar to something around the same time that was going on in the county.
You're frozen, Chairman.
Postponing sexual involvement program. Both programs kind of here.
I think I caught part of your question. You kind of froze almost halfway through it. I think you're talking about DARE and why it went away. There were many studies. There were many studies done across the country with respect to was DARE working or was DARE not working. Historically, for RPD, I can't really speak as to why it went away in RPD. Just wasn't around during that time when the decision was made. But we always look for ways to engage students within our classroom. I'm looking forward to working with Dr. Leslie Myers to see how we can kind of maybe do that, even if it doesn't occur within the school. But I think there is still some component that we need to maintain relationships within that. And we plan to work with our patrol divisions to make sure that we still do have a liaison that can have communication with an administrator within the schools, even though the proposal is to remove the school resource officers out of the RCSD. So we still hope to maintain that relationship, and I look forward to working with Dr. Leslie Myers, Smalls, to see how we can do that.
Thank you. Any other questions for the chief on the RPD budget?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Ortiz.
On 913, it talks about decreasing the number of cold cases and reinvestigating by using modern technology. About how many do we anticipate opening up for testing?
Opening up for testing, you mean?
You have listed in here that says biological analysis that did not previously exist. So
those are cold cases. Those are individual investigations. So you say how many we have open? They always remain open.
No, not how many you have open. How many do you anticipate doing this testing on that you would have liked to have done years ago, but now that it's available, you will do now? So how many do you anticipate undergoing this analysis?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer. It's done on a case-by-case basis based on whichever the investigation kind of develops with regard to that. So I can't really give you a number per se.
Okay. All right, well, maybe if we could look a little bit further into that, because you have on here decreased number of cold cases. So that would tell me that you have an idea in terms of what you're looking at and what you hope to get down to based on this. So if you could just look into that further, that would be helpful. And then the other question I have around that is there's a loss, it says here, in terms of an investigator. Is that a homicide investigator or something else?
That was an investigator that was taken from the tactical unit. That was taken from our tactical unit, that we took all of our investigators out of our tactical unit. That we had two. That was one final investigator that was remaining. So that came from the tactical unit.
Okay, so how many homicide investigators do we have?
I believe 25, but let me get back to you with the specific number. I believe it's 25.
Okay, if you could, that would be great. And also on average, what their caseload looks like. That would also be helpful. The other questions that I have, and I have a ton, but I'm guessing we're running out of time here, around animal control. Chris, what role, if any, do we play in actually seeking out animal abuses? Whether it be individuals or whether it be rings, whether it be, whatever that looks like, what role do we play in actually seeking out abuse?
Well, to be honest, we're a partner in that, but we're kind of on a peripheral role because it requires police or peace officer status to investigate animal cruelty. So when we see something that we want to refer to one of those agencies, we refer to RPD or we refer to the Humane Society's law enforcement division. But we don't have the authority to investigate animal cruelty. We're primarily focused on dog and cat local ordinance issues and supporting owners of companion animals.
Okay. Have we seen an uptick at all for surrenders or issues during this time frame with coronavirus, with folks not being able necessarily to pay their own bills per se, but then having to take care of animals? Have we seen an increase in surrendered animals or anything of that nature?
We actually haven't. We didn't, in our industry, we didn't know what to expect. So industry-wide, shelters have really tried to focus on reducing intake to make sure that there was space in the event that we needed to prepare for an influx of animals from COVID-infected homes, from people that were hospitalized. That didn't happen, or hasn't happened yet, thankfully. And we didn't know if our staff was going to be impacted and we'd have staffing shortages. So we've been really focused on reducing intake, getting animals out into foster homes as soon as possible. So we're minimizing the number of animals at the shelter. And we just haven't seen an increase in surrendered animals. The community has responded, and we provide resources on how to support continuing to keep a pet or how to rehome it directly through a rehoming service that doesn't involve, an intake at a shelter, which everybody knows is stressful and not good for the animal or for the staff or the community.
Right, thank you. And then my last question for you, Chris, is how have we been making any, or are we making any progress on our fundraising goals for our renovation, hopefully expansion of our wonderful animal service location?
Yeah, I think that's probably for a future conversation, but no progress since March 14th for sure. Yeah, so it's a conversation, it's an ongoing dialogue. Our partners at the Verona Street Animal Society hired an executive director, and I think, you know, through that collaboration, we're going to be able to move the needle on fundraising. That could help either, you know, with some sort of major renovation, expansion, or new construction.
All right, thank you very much.
Councilman, we have 21 investigators assigned to major crimes.
Okay, great. And then average caseload when you have a chance.
Yeah.
Vice President Lightfoot, and then Councilmember Lubian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As brought up before by Councilmember Dr. Gruber, he talked about in this budget that there's not buying any more military style equipment for the future or for this year. But I would ask, what are we doing with the current things that we have now that present to be military style equipment? And I asked that question because due to, you know, the protests and things that we've had, we've got a lot of emails around bullets, rubber bullets being used, the type of material that, you know, we've seen presented at some of these protests may present as escalating the situation as opposed to de-escalating the situation. So I would like to know, I think, and I, you know, advocate strongly against, as much as possible, utilizing any of these type of military style tactics, if you will, when dealing with incidences. And I'd like to know your thoughts around existing equipment that we have currently that seem to be revered by the community as escalating situations as opposed to de-escalating situations.
That's one of the things that I do keep in mind when you talk about balancing public safety, the safety of the officers, as well as the optics, right? And I think what we've done throughout the last couple of incidents that we've had is that we have taken a measured response. Like was mentioned earlier, what Councilmember Gruber said, we have been working with the community to make sure that we, with regard to the PR festival, post-PR festival, to make sure that we do not create a response that may incite anything. With respect to current vehicles that we have, I got a note passed to me from our deputy chief, is that we do have one Bearcat that is up for, that's just aging with respect to that. So we do have plans to try to purchase another vehicle that is aging with respect to that Bearcat that we've had for quite some years. But yes, I'm always cognizant and always aware of the posture that we take, but I have to balance that with public safety. Many times you may see high-risk warrants that have some Bearcat vehicle, right? That may come up on Facebook that many departments use across the country. That's a piece of personal protective equipment that we have for our officers. These officers conduct high-risk warrants. It goes through several layers of approval when these high-risk warrants are conducted. And we respond to many of the neighborhoods where, you know, people call us about individuals who have weapons, individuals who are selling drugs from various houses. But the Bearcat is an armored vehicle that is only used in the event of a high-risk warrant or there's a potential threat to officer safety. You know, we do not use the Bearcat vehicle for protests. We haven't done since I've been chief here.
Okay, well, I just thank you. I just reiterate the fact that, you know, perception becomes reality to a lot of people. And so, you know, I appreciate that fact that you're saying that they're not used in protest. But when they are used, I think maybe there's some communication that needs to happen within the community, because we tend to get these calls. They're saying, hey, we have this military style approach or arrest that's happening on my street. And people just, they don't know what's going on and they're afraid. And oftentimes we get those calls and then we have to investigate later and we find out that it was a heavily armed drug dealer arrest or something of that nature. So I think the community should be notified, you know, when these things are happening so that they can, one, protect themselves and stay in the house or whatnot. And two, they'll know what's happening and that, that this is a specific targeted event that's maybe unsafe for not only them, but for the officers.
I hear you loud and clear. But as you know, when conducting search warrants, it's kind of hard to make the community aware of certain operations that take effect for a number of reasons, for officer safety, for loss of evidence, and the like. So I hear you loud and clear on that, though.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Booyan, you had last question?
Yeah, so I just find it hard to imagine in a community like ours, an armored vehicle being necessary. I understand I'm not a police officer, but I'd like to know when we have used it for those high risk warrants, and what has the outcome been? Has the car been fired on? I guess I'm just trying to understand when police are getting out of the car to go inside of a building, how an armored vehicle is protective. So that's just for my own education. I want to know what the total amount that RPD received in federal dollars last year, and how it was spent. My final question is around residency. So I had asked for a list in the CIP hearings of positions in the city that are required to live in this, or personnel that's required to live in the city, and the status. And everyone on the list came back as a resident or working on it. But what I noticed is there were a lot of people not on that list. And when I did a comparison, there were some jobs, and just off the top of my head, animal control is one of them, where there were two people in the same position, and one was on the required list in the city and one was not. And I was just wondering if you could speak to why that might be. Are people getting waivers? Does it have to do with when they came in?
Some of it, so it's a little bit of all of what you talked about. So some positions for people that are grandfathered in, I believe back in 2006 or 2007, the residency requirement went into place. And so if you worked with the city prior to, then you were not required to live in the city. That changed, and certain positions were included. Police officers, firefighters, I believe 911 officials are exempt from being required to live in the city by state law. It's not city law, it's state law, civil service law. And so IT, we were having a real difficult time recruiting, given the changes in the system and the fact that we still have different systems, the mainframe and other things. And so a number of years ago, we adjusted the residency requirement for our IT department. So there are different skill sets within the police department in and of itself. There are civilian people that are required to live in the city, especially when we talk about technicians and other things, civilian technicians, whereas those that are police officer technicians, they are not required to live in the city. So it all depends on the position. It depends on the civil service requirement. It depends on when you were hired. And so there's a number of different factors that and laws that we have to abide by that determine that. And that's why that list is different depending on which department that you're looking at. The police chief, the fire police, the fire chief, and all of the commissioners, including the deputy mayor, are required to live in the city. The 911 director, because technically they're a county, a city employee, but a county director, based on that agreement with the county of Monroe, the 911 director does not have to live in the city. And I don't believe that the library director has to either, because that's a partnership between the county and the city.
Okay. And the deputy chief positions, are those required?
By law, the deputy chief positions are not required to live in the city, both the fire and the police department, because at any point in time, they can go back and be a police officer. So they, when we looked at civil service law, at one point in time, there was a requirement that the deputy chiefs had to live in the city. But when we looked at the state law and the fact that they are still considered to be police officers, by law, we cannot require the deputy chiefs to live in the city.
Okay, thanks for that answer.
I'm sorry? Oh.
So thank you for the answer.
Oh, no problem.
Councilmember Gruber.
Yeah, this is
Last
my
question.
Thank you, Chair Evans. You know, one of the things that I think one of the really important backdrops to what's going on right now in the conversation for the last 2 hours is that all the data shows that crime is at an all-time low. Not just here in Rochester, but across the country. And there's a whole lot of arguments and explanations for why that may be. But when I look at 919 in the budget and look at the actual just stats that RPD provides in terms of the calls and the different arrests and so on and so forth, it seems like the stats that we report are fairly flat. And I'm just granted, it's only a 3-year period, but I'm just kind of wondering, Chief, in the last couple minutes that we have here, can you just give some type of analysis of what is going on right now in terms of the larger scope of where crime is across the nation in our community, and what we're doing to reflect what I believe is generally very, very low levels of crime across the board?
Well, I would say, you know, our overall arrest numbers are down, and that can be contributed to a number of things. It can be contributed to procedural justice, more of a restorative approach. Certainly, we had to come to deals with the criminal justice reforms that New York State implemented this year. What we're seeing from an anecdotal perspectives, we're seeing during, I don't want to contribute to COVID, it's not a correlation. But we did see some gun crimes go up this year, specific to shootings and homicides. You know, we're at 13 homicides this year for the city. But from an anecdotal perspective, you're right. Things are down across the board. I know Nick Petiti wants to talk a little bit about some of the crime stats that we have here. Go ahead, Nick.
Sure. You hit one of my hot button issues. One of the things, to your point about these numbers being static, is a byproduct of the actual process for budgeting to account for these things, right? On your sheet, you see actual numbers for 2018, and you see estimated numbers for 2019-20. It's because when I have to compile these and take a look at historical data and try to project out what it's going to be, that happens in February of 2020, where I'm projecting where we're going to be at the end of July. And then I'm budgeting for 18 months from now on a number of crime statistics that fluctuate greatly. There's a ton of variation in between crime. So part of what looks like relatively stable numbers is really masking an overall trend down. And to your point, crime is at an all-time low. But to be fair, it's massively affected by reductions in property-based crime. Burglaries are continually dropping, larcenies are continually dropping, and motor vehicle thefts are almost non-existent from a crime category standpoint. That's driving the increase down. There's a lot of variation in violent-related crimes. They kind of fluctuate from year to year, so it's very difficult if we're going to be looking at these crimes in a binary comparison, one year versus another, to start drawing conclusions, which is why we've taken an approach internally to really try to move beyond just year to year, year to date binary comparisons. And, you know, I'd love to have a conversation, probably not in this forum, or we can jump a little deeper into how some of the ways that we report numbers kind of drive perceptions of the way we react to crime and the way that crime is actually trending.
Thank you. I guess I would just close my comments by going full circle. I would argue, to add to the argument I made earlier in the hearing, that another reason why a reduction of overtime makes sense is because we are at an all-time low for crime. And I understand the mayor's point. I understand the chief's point that some of those things are beyond, when there's an Amherst game or a Red Wings game, that is what it is. You got to pay overtime for that. But presumably, if we have a whole lot less cases and cold cases and things of that nature, I would hope and assume that would come with a regular decrease in allotted overtime hours.
I think that's another healthy data discussion. From a budget standpoint, we look at.
Also have to look at. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, so from a budget perspective, you're looking at a total dollar amount. There's a lot of different data categories that go into overtime. Some are directly tied to crime levels. Some are directly tied to community engagement, which are often two different sides of a seesaw, right? As one goes down, one goes up. The other thing that during some of the earlier comments when we were talking about overtime budgeting, I think it might have even been you, Councilmember Gruber, mentioned hiring more officers being directly correlated with reductions in overtime. That isn't necessarily the case, although from a logic standpoint, it seems like it should be. But when you talk about 700 officers and you talk about, or 725, and you talk about overtime, the overtime gets totaled up in hour increments, right? So it's almost death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? So it's an hour here, it's an hour there, it's an hour here. Hiring an officer who has to report for an 8-hour shift doesn't necessarily plug all the single holes. There's also non-discretionary overtime expenditures that come with additional officers, like additional time for court. So the more officers that we put on, the more court time that gets accrued, the more overtime that comes to pay for that. If it's, let's say, a night officer that has to appear during the days. So there's a lot of different data discussions that we could have around both overtime and crime and how they relate.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Madam Mayor. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I just also wanted to note the work that we have done in the city of Rochester. And even though there is more work that of course needs to be done, as we look at our policies and our procedures, and I know the chief continues to make that a priority on his end. But, when a number of years ago, when Noble came out to support President Obama's 21st Century Policing Initiative, we, in our policies and procedures, banned chokeholds. We required our officers to report, to also report if they had a use of force, to de-escalate. We have all of our officers, patrol officers, have body-worn cameras. We have a aggressive and probably one of the most aggressive body-worn camera procedure and policies as it pertains to when the body camera has to be on in the state of New York, if not in the country. We continue to work diligently to build relationships with our community because we know that relationship has been tenuous, it's been broken, and for good reason. We understand and hear the concerns of the community. But the chief has worked very hard to build those relationships with not just the community, but with our faith officials and also with recruiting people of diverse backgrounds. We want a police department that reflects the community that we serve, and we're working very, very hard to do so. We are giving our officers the training that they need in order to patrol and effectively police our community. And when we get it wrong, we hold them accountable. When they get it right, we support them. I think that we have to be very aware of where we are now and where we need to go as a community. And it has to be something that we do together because we know that even though crime has gone down, our calls for service have not necessarily been reduced significantly. There are still many people in our community that are victims of crime, rather you're talking about, as Councilmember Pio indicated earlier, rape victims. We have children that are being sexually abused. We have other incidents of assault and other things that are happening across the board. And we want to be able to respond to those victims in a way that they feel that we are taking their concerns very seriously. And so it definitely is a balancing act, and we will continue to adjust and improve as we move forward. And when different issues come to the forefront, our community has no problem with giving us a call. You know, Reverend Stewart has us all on speed dial. I've been in many meetings with Iman. I'm talking about different issues from the ACLU perspective. And there will be times where we can agree to disagree. But our goal is to be able to move forward and be able to move forward together and work together to improve the outcomes for the residents that we all love and care about. In the city of Rochester, our police department is definitely committed to doing that. And I think that the chief, through his leadership, has shown that over and over again. Having been born and raised in this city, educated in this city, and come up through the ranks, nobody understands more so than him and I what our community face on a daily basis. And we will continue to do our best to respond to the needs of the community while also keeping our citizens safe.
Thank you, Mayor. And also thank you, Chief, for your time this afternoon. Colleagues, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll get back with the MBD budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Nancy, I seem to remember that budget hearings is around your birthday. Is today your birthday? Very recently?
It's the 16th.
Ah, council meeting is your birthday.
Yeah.
Well, happy early birthday.
You have a good memory. Thank you.
Nancy, can we drive by your house and honk and stuff?
Sure. I'll be here, but
Okay. Is everyone back? Welcome, Commissioner Kirkmeyer.
Thank you.
We're going to get started with the neighborhood and business development section of the budget. I want to thank Commissioner Kirkmeyer for being here. And I'd like to turn it over to him to make any opening statements that he may have, but also give him the opportunity to introduce his team that he has with him on the line. Commissioner Kirkmeyer.
Thank you, Councilmember Evans. Let me start with introductions, starting with our Deputy Commissioner, Dana Miller, our Assistant Commissioner, Ann DeCivitella, our Director of Buildings and Zoning, Kurt Martin. I apologize, I can't see everybody at once on here, so there's two screens, but I'm trying to catch everybody that's on here. Our Director of Neighborhood Service Centers, Daisy Algarin, my assistant, Cheryl Hickey, our Principal Staff Assistant, and the person responsible for putting our budget together on our side, Mary Kay Kenrick, our Manager of Housing, Carol Wheeler. We've got our Director of Business Development, Thad Schofield, our Director of Real Estate, Paul Scuderi. Let me just switch over here, make sure I'm not missing anybody. And then our Neighborhood Service Center Administrator, starting in the Southeast with Nancy Johns-Price, Southwest, James Demps, our Northwest, Tammy Heron, and our Northeast, Carlos Torres. I'll just be brief on the opening statement. You know, earlier this year, I was quite convinced that you know, this was the best department I could ever imagine having. And then the last 3 months hit, and you know, it's just been flat out amazing the work that this staff and all the people in MBD have put forth through this really challenging and unprecedented times that we've experienced. Now I'm absolutely 100% positive, and I don't think in my 35 years, I've never been more proud to be part of this organization than I am today. So great job by this team and they're you know, all their coworkers, and we're ready to go.
Thank you. Councilmember Patterson.
Thank you. Okay, so let me start by saying, Gary, you are amazing. Your team is amazing. I love you guys. But since you are where I'm going with this, I'll just get to it. Minority women-owned business enterprises had a KPI for the last 2 years. It was literally on the same page of the budget book 2 years in a row, 6/12. Our crack staff discovered that it is missing. So you and I have had a conversation in the background here the last couple of minutes, and I understand that you are still capturing that information, but that information is no longer is not to be found anywhere in this budget book. Now, I'll let you talk about it from there.
All right, so thanks, Mike. You know, part of that is this is a really transformative task that we entertained this year with, of course, the support and help of Kate May. And we did it in pretty short order, but we took a structure that had 84 disconnected, disjointed KPIs that were buried within the various bureaus in the department and didn't really demonstrate in any strategical, purposeful way their affiliation and connection with common goals and objectives. And we really broke that down to 6 hierarchy, you know, overarching objectives that are really strategic and have 37 remaining KPIs that support 17 objectives in the comprehensive plan. And so in doing so, things like MWB, which we are absolutely capturing and will continue to capture, the thought process from the data folks is that the future of that should be a sole source reporting from the city perspective. And I think the disconnection there might have been that we were one of only, you know, the mayor's department was the only other department that did some transformative change with the KPIs this year. So I think we missed it. I think that was a missed opportunity for us. We assumed it was going to be in there and it's not in there. So we will absolutely report it. We're capturing it. It's not a big deal for us. We're still capturing many of the data points that were eliminated. They're not eliminated. Kurt Martin still has to report all of our code enforcement data to the state. We don't necessarily feel that every one of those has a role in our 6 objectives. So, you know, we'll fix that. I already got on the phone with Kate. That was a little mishap on our side.
Yes, and we definitely apologize for that. We'll get you the information, and we'll make sure, Chris, to make a note that that is included in the KPIs for budget for next year, as well as see if we can do an addendum or put the addendum so that that information is available for this year.
Okay, so now going forward, where will the MWBE KPIs be located? Because in our conversation, I was directed to take a look at finance and purchasing, which has some MWB KPIs, but they're different. They're not the same thing.
Right.
So what's the thinking on that?
You know, I don't want to speak for the mayor, and I don't want to speak for Kate, but I think, again, from a data reporting perspective, we do want to report holistically the efforts of MBE. You know, we want to have that captured in one place, departmentally, but one place. All departments weren't involved with this transition. So, you know, it was a missed opportunity for us to have a more in-depth conversation about carrying over data. That's commonly found in other departments. That's the construction data I think you're referring to.
Yes, exactly.
But the construction activity happens in DS, but it's not being reported by DS, right? So, I mean, we have to get to a point where strategically data that is similar and common and can be reported in a manner that shows the total value, even if it's broken down by department, I think has a tremendous value and interest to how we're moving forward. But again, I don't want to speak for the mayor or Kate.
So part of it is, as you know, council member, we did the Baker-Tilly study. We have been working with data experts and trying to get certified as we put more data online and are more transparent with the public. We could not go through the entire budget book in 1 year and adjust what we're capturing, but it was to go to the departments and say, you know, what is the work that you're doing, and the best way for us to provide that information in a way that people can understand it, and it's not as complicated as it was before. And so basically having to report in different divisions, MWBE, a person that does not know that they have to go to each section of the budget book to find out the MWBE numbers would assume that once they looked at finance or they looked at DES that they were there. They didn't know they had to go to MBD. So we were looking at trying to combine those numbers to make it more easier and transparent for people to know where that data and that information lies. And so it was an oversight this year because we did not do the entire city KPI review. As you know, we were going to do this in phases. And so we'll definitely get you that data and that information and make sure that we provide the public with that information as well for this year, and make sure that it's reported for next year.
Okay, well, I thank you for that. I'll keep the sermon to myself and allow me to give credit to our crack team of data analysts for pointing that information out to us so that we could address it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Vice President Lightfoot.
Thank you, Chairman. Staying in line with Councilmember Patterson, as far as our amazing team, I'm going to stay in line with some of the questions that they asked because they have some very good questions. There's a big focus to shift the customer satisfaction as measures. What will be the tool to measure this, and how would it be distributed?
So to date, you know, we've had 2 of our processes that have a long history of calculating our satisfied customers through satisfaction surveys at the end of the process. So for example, if you get a C of O, you get a thank you letter from the mayor, and the back side of that is a satisfaction survey that we hope that people will submit. We've been doing that with the C of O and the building permit process for many years now. So the goal is to push that throughout the organization to all of our processes, all of our application processes. And then hopefully at some point we can automate it so that people have the convenience of being able to do that online where they're able to. But right now, what we're starting with is just trying to broaden our reach to all of our customer base through all of the processes we're facilitating. And it's by means of the satisfaction survey.
Thank you. We seem to, I know that we're tracking our investments in dollars, and some of this will be absorbed by Redco. I know Redco is undergoing a lot of changes as far as how it's operating. Will Redco be issuing reports? And if so, will they include some of the old KPI information?
So finance is another topic that, similar to the MWB we just talked about, where there is a reporting mechanism as the city as a whole, right, through budget that reports financial stuff like revenue and things. But what we have done is, and I hope everybody's had a chance to look at your MBD highlight brochure, or if not, please do so. The back side of that has a more inclusive capturing, if you will, of all the associated financial things associated with our activity, both from a revenue perspective and a development perspective. So we actually took it further than the budget used to take it, because we really want people to know that the activity that occurs or initiates in this department does bring a lot of resources in the form of revenue and investment to the city. So we absolutely are going to keep reporting that. This will be an annual report that you receive, but you'll also get the financials through budget as well.
Thank you, Gary. It looks like the neighborhood service center is collaborating a lot with a number of departments. Will they be used as a point of contact for engagement for all city departments?
I mean, I can tell you, since 1997, because I've been part of that organization since that time, I've always operated under the understanding, as we all do in MBD, that our service centers are the public-facing entity that connects both residents and businesses to resources, whether internal to the city or external. So, they are the most public-facing, they attend the most meetings, they are the face of our city and represent us well in that. And so we always operate under the understanding that they do very often, if not all the time, form that connection between people in need and departments that provide whatever that need is.
Final question, Mr. Chairman. Can you provide more details on this community university? What is the curriculum? How many people can it support, and when does it meet?
So I'll talk briefly about it, and then for if Daisy has anything to add. So we do anticipate that it'll have 30 participants. It did get impacted a little bit by COVID, in that we're hoping to start in fall, and it might have to be in a virtual capacity. But Daisy can speak more to the program specifics.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can everyone hear me? I was having problems with my mic. Okay. A few years ago, we launched the Southwest Leadership Academy, and we, through our analysis and finding and looking at our data in regards to the results of the training, we found a favorable amount of responses wanting to continue that initiative. So I think the last one was off, well, the first and the last one was offered in 2016/17, and in mid-17, we began the conversation of making that available to the community actually at the request of the community. And then we went into a conversation with neighborhood leaders about something called guidelines. And we came to find out that there was an opportunity there to use that discussion to help educate and support, and to a certain sense, provide empowerment to our neighborhood leaders on how to stay engaged with the city, our government, and also how to facilitate conversation within their own neighborhoods about leadership, not just current leadership, but also growing leadership. So we are planning to launch this fall, and our maximum is going to be able to be at 30. We're going to use some city funding, but also some funding we have left from the original program that was provided through a grant from RECF.
And we could,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, we can provide the program guideline for you so you can see what the curriculum is and all that stuff.
That would be great. And just, is it, you said Southwest University, is it only going to be geared towards people in the Southwest, or is it citywide?
No, the new one is citywide.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Harris.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about, I see in your program changes that you have a positive ticket project. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, so I'll start and then either kick it over. I'll probably kick it to Nancy since it started in the Southeast. So, you know, this is about trying to build the relationships between RPD and the residents. It's about reinforcing things like volunteerism and people doing good. Nancy's been working really hard on it for a while, and the goal is to broaden that throughout the city in every quadrant. So Nancy, you want to add anything to that?
So, Councilmember Harris, how are you doing?
Good, how you doing?
Good, good. So the idea is we also have a Flower City AmeriCorps member that is dedicated to that. For the first time, it's actually woven into the RPD. So when they actually do a positive ticket, it now goes into their CAD system and is reported. So then we can do a better job of keeping track of where are they being given out, who's getting them out. That goes directly to the deputy chief, and then they send it to us so that we can stay on top of it. The other thing behind this is if it rises to a point where it really is do the right thing, then we take that candidate and put them in that path, because that's another whole way of honoring people that are doing the right thing.
So is something that's identified by the officer, or is that something that's done by another community member?
It comes at us from all different directions.
Okay.
The patrol officer in the Goodman section may actually see something, stop, and give that person a positive ticket. It may come to us via a neighborhood person, and they may actually say, well, this is going on over there. And then what we'll do is we'll connect the beat officer from the Goodman section, and then have, or the crime prevention officers who've been phenomenal, and then go ahead and hand out a positive ticket. So what we're trying to do now is, we have it kind of going really well in the Goodman section, although there's some, steps we can take there. We now want to get it to all of the sections, and that'll mean going to roll call and actually talking to different patrol officers and getting them to understand how their colleagues have done it and how it works. And then hopefully it'll grow from there.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. Then I also have a follow-up question about how are we doing with the nuisance activity, nuisance advisory board? What are they doing now? How many members do we have? And what are they doing with cases? How are we doing with the cases during COVID?
So I'll cover some of that and then turn it over to Daisy. So, as part of the nuisance reform, there is a report that's presented to council every 6 months. So you will get your next update in July.
Okay.
And that'll capture all the various activities associated with the nuisance program. What we're trying to focus on is, reducing the repeat offenders, the repeat incidences, certainly addressing people that are properties that meet the threshold. And then in the meantime, working out, agreements where everybody resolves issues otherwise. We also are trying to do more with technology on the nuisance subject. And what nuisance is one of the subjects that we did look to expand in our current KPI structure. But as we expand that structure, we want to best we can set processes up that are automated. We don't want to count widgets. We don't want to have manually intensive KPI processes. We want to have the systems capture that by means of activity entered into a system. And so we do have a system now where nuisance cases are captured and somewhat managed. And so we're looking at that probably over this year to see if we can do something more with a KPI that can capture more, purposefully, the positive stuff that's going on there. But Daisy, do you want, and I know we're trying to set up virtual hearings for the advisory board, but Daisy can speak more to the current capacity of the board.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Nuisance Advisory Board stopped the hearings right around March 16 when we paused. So we're having, as the Commissioner said, we're having conversations about having virtual hearings back on track. And we hope that sometime, at least by July, we can bring them back in. The advisory board has a membership of 9 people, 2 representatives from every quad and 1 from Center City / Southwest. The one of the things that we're seeing as a pattern since we started the hearings and we redesigned the law is that those who have reached threshold are required to have an abatement plan. But yet we're seeing that properties that have received points, even if they're under threshold, want an abatement plan, voluntarily come to us to put together an abatement plan to address the issue at the property. And that's one of the things that we saw in the spirit of the law, that we wanted to see voluntary compliance. And I'm happy to say that's the pattern that we're now seeing.
As you, so your numbers reduce the number, the number of properties that may be at risk for, shutting down or.
Yes, and
okay.
we're also seeing a number, another pattern which has to do with the properties that, I think I said it before, when they come in and let's say they just get 6 points, 12 is really the threshold within a certain period, and then 18. These particular properties are just calling us and say, I want to sit down. And we're making it very intentional to make contact. It's no longer you get a point, you're not going to hear from us. It's also on a public platform where the public can see and hold us accountable for properties that they see, and they can say, hey, this property, we're still seeing problems. It's now a threshold. What are you doing about it? We can be very open and share with them what's going on with the property.
Thank you. I also believe that we have seen a reduction, correct, Daisy, in the repeat incidences.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And I guess my final follow-up question is, is there a backlog because of COVID? Or have you seen that, we haven't had much of an issue because of COVID?
A backlog in nuisance?
Yes.
Daisy, is there a backlog?
I don't
because
think
you guys weren't meeting.
Yeah, no, actually the administrators are out there. They're posting points on properties, and they're having virtual meetings and phone calls with property owners. So we really haven't stopped addressing nuisance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ortiz. And then after that, it'd be Councilmember Gruber and then Lupien.
Okay, and I'm sorry, it sounds like we're all over the board. Is that the case?
You know, folks, yeah, we were talking about 6.2, 6.5 and KPIs, but it seems like folks have broad questions. So
all right, here we go.
That's fine. I'll open it up to all departments. I mean, all areas of this section. But just if you could just, when you ask your question, just talk about what section you're talking about so we can then turn to it.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So first question, surveys. I'm glad that we do them, and I'm glad that we have such a high number. But the difference, the 10 or 15% that are not as favorable, are we actively categorizing the areas for which people are dissatisfied so that we can use that to try to, improve our processes?
Oh, absolutely. I would tell you, I think we've been doing the C of O satisfaction survey since, I want to say 2010. And we've actually changed policy and process in response to suggestions from landlords. So we read every one of them. I used to do that personally. Kurt does that now for that program. And we take everything that we get in terms of feedback as a means of improving what we do. So I would tell you that if I had to put something into the most common category for things that rate below where we would say was, a satisfied customer, it would be more associated with fees and/or I don't like to do lead tests. But that's for that program.
Okay, so we have an actual process to do that review and make recommendations from it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So on 614, I have a question. It says attract new businesses to generate growth downtown and not obviously in the neighborhoods. How specifically, what does our strategy look like? How specifically are we going to be attracting new businesses?
Well, I'll speak a little bit to that because I think it was mostly to do with Sibley and the business activity that was associated with that was paused slightly because of COVID. But Dana probably can speak more directly to that.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yes, specifically, we are working, as the Commissioner said, with the folks that own the Sibley building, Wind Development. They are developing within the building 2 businesses right now that we are assisting them with. There is a 3rd business that just recently opened in the corner spot, the new Bank of America branch of the future. And there's also another bank branch that opened, Citizens Bank, in the building. And we are working with them to attract another business that is a business that's highly sought after in the community. So we're working directly with them. We're also working with the owners of the 5 buildings at North Clinton and Main Street to complete the rehab of those buildings and then to get the first floor spaces rehabbed and have businesses in there. We're continuing to work with the owners of the other businesses. Most of the other businesses in that section of Main Street are owned by CGI, specifically Bob Bartosowicz. So we continue to work with him to recruit businesses for those. And we've worked very closely with Patrick Dutton, who owns the Glenny building. We had a tour of that building to see the status of the development, and we'll be working with him for a first floor retail tenant. There are also 2 retail spaces in the Link, the old Alliance building, and we're working to help find tenants for that. And eventually we would expect some kind of activity, perhaps not retail, but some kind of activity in the Parcel 5 area. So we continue to work very closely with the owners of those businesses, primarily through Thad Schofield's business development department.
Great, thank you. And as we go through that process, I'm sure we are, but again, I guess just throwing it out there again to ensure that those owners and businesses are working with us to employ city residents to the best of our ability. That would obviously go a long way for us. One of the other questions I have, I'm sorry, I'm speeding through these since we're doing all the sections. How many, if I missed it, I apologize, but how will the selection process happen for those 30 city leaders that it says that will be selected for the community university? How will that selection process work for the 30 folks?
Daisy, can you respond to that, please?
Absolutely. There will be a maximum of 30, and we will send out applications to all our neighborhood leaders and use social media, and along with the help of possibly a press release. And it'll be, the NSC administrators and myself will review the applications, and it'll be based on a criteria for selection. It'll be citywide.
Okay, and can you share what that criteria will look like so that we are aware?
Absolutely, it'll be part of the application process. We're going to share that with everybody.
Okay, wonderful. The other question I have is on the intake process coming back in-house from the partners. So what was it that made us want to make this change? I guess what was happening or not happening that precipitated this change?
Okay, so 2 years ago, and for the years that precede that, for a while there, we had 2 organizations with our intake. So it was Pat Stone had half the city and ABC. Last year, through our RFP process, the cost of that service almost doubled. So we had to go with just ABC. In doing so, we started to formulate a plan to bring it in-house for a couple of reasons. One is, it provides a positive reason to go to the service center, right? We have a lot of reasons to go to the service center. Some of them are positive and a lot of them are negative because people are suffering from one thing or another. So this is a positive reason to go to the service center. It also takes advantage of the people most embedded into the fabric of our residential, neighborhoods, which is our neighborhood service center staff. So it really allows us to broaden our footprint and coverage to get the word out and to really sell the grants that sometimes, I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's kind of shocking how little we get attention to these grants, even when we walk the streets. So, you know, we're trying to do two things. We're trying to take advantage of the fact that we have quadrant-based structures in the neighborhood, so it's convenient for people, and take advantage of the fact that our neighborhood service center staff are out in the public every day talking to people.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of grants, so now all intake will happen at service centers for all grants.
Yeah, I mean, you could submit it at City Hall if you wanted to, but that's the primary objective once they're open again, mind you, but yes.
Right. Okay. And trying to calculate what the need really looks like out there, Gary, can you give me, I know that like, for example, the roofing program, I know we get thousands of applications, but have we done, how many of them are really in need in terms of when you survey the conditions of the roofs, what does the scope of the problem really look like?
Well, we know,
I'll just be specific to roofs.
Yeah, okay. So for the roof program, we know a couple years ago, last time we did an application process, we had 1,200 applicants, 600 seniors, 600 non-seniors. Between the people we served, the surveys that we did subsequent to that, and sometimes it proved to be they didn't need a roof, and there are unfortunately some situations where they can't meet the minimum criteria for a grant because their taxes aren't paid or their mortgage is delinquent. So there's a lot of circumstances that negate somebody's ability, but if you take away all that population and focus on just who can be served, we exhausted that. As amazing as that sounds, we exhausted that list. So we're ready to search and seek other applicants for the roof program. The general rehab, we haven't sent anybody on their way yet. So anybody that has qualified, met the qualifications, has been served in the general rehab. So, you know, I guess the answer is we know there's a need out there, but sometimes the need is limited. Our ability to serve the need is limited by the qualification process.
Okay, so my two last questions. If you, at some point you could help us better understand how many people get turned away as a result of not having been able to pay their taxes. I would really like to be able to understand what that looks like. Because obviously if there's a need, but they don't meet that criteria because they haven't paid their taxes, it's this revolving cycle here is that they can't pay bills, therefore they can't fix their house, therefore. So getting an understanding of getting turned away for specifically that reason, I'd like to understand what that.
So that touches on an additional benefit of bringing it in-house, right? So right now, ABC provides us completed application packages. They handle all the conversations that have to happen to get to the point where the application is completed. And then they submit the completed package to us. So while we can get information from them about that, now if somebody comes into a service center and they are met with that obstacle, the service center staff is better positioned to say, are you aware of a tax agreement? Do you need a tax agreement? Do you need some financial assistance? Do you need to be connected to our financial empowerment center staff? You know, so I think this is an additional benefit that I don't know that you can put a weight on it because I think it's going to serve us really well.
And someone who is current on a tax agreement could qualify?
If they're current, yeah. If they have a tax agreement, they can qualify, yeah.
Okay, and my last question is on the zombie grant there, where not really a zombie grant, but it says the abandonment actions. I guess prior to COVID, because I'm sure this all slowed down, how have our abandonment cases numbers look like this past year?
So we initiate 2 a month in code enforcement. That means we prep them, we screen them for qualifications, and we get them ready for law to take it thereafter. Sometimes things resolve themselves in that the property changes ownership or the bank if there's a bank involved, does the responsible thing with the foreclosure process. Sometimes they go a different direction and they have to be demolished. So the courts have, as you know, paused. And so we certainly haven't been able to get to court. So we have a backlog there, but we have continued to prep 2 a month. And we just had a meeting with law last week about how we're going to get back to court. I don't know that court is set yet, State Supreme, and whether or not they're ready for, court appearances or virtual, or I don't think that's been settled yet.
Okay, all right. As we ramp up again, I'd like to understand how things are moving along, but thank you. 2 cases a month, got it.
Thank you. Councilmember Gruber and then Lupian.
Thanks. I have a couple questions that I'll ask now, and then I'll hope to get back in line later. But for right now, I'm curious. This is obviously a big year because of the new zoning code, and I'm wondering what Commissioner, what role you imagine council is going to be able to play in terms of understanding what the facilitation of the comp plan to life will be.
So, I mean, we've been working really hard. Planning and zoning staff have been meeting 3 times a week for the last several months. You'll see in the budget, we shaved, I think it was $90,000, which was going to go towards what we had in the kitty for a consultant. We're still hiring a consultant. The RFP's out and it's up, I think, the end of June. So we're still going to get assistance to engage the public, to write the code and to do the seeker process. But staff have been really working diligently and very hard with law to start to break down some of the things that the comprehensive plan speaks to that the zoning code is in current conflict with. So we have an amazing team of zoning planners and planners and planning. And I would put them against any consultant in the country. So we're trying to take advantage of that. It is a little overwhelming and it does add to a lot of the stresses that go along with our work environment. But I think we're going to be able to go down a path that ultimately will result in council being brought in as we start to reach out to the community and have a draft maybe, or have at least an assessment section by section of what we believe needs to change to coincide with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, that's great. And I would echo what you said about the planning and zoning team. There's incredible talent in City Hall, and that's something that I always appreciate. I think Commissioner Kirkmeyer, that if the adoption of the comprehensive plan, caused a lot of conversation in the community, the adoption of a new zoning plan is going to as well. And we all know that council is going to be directly responsible for making sure that we're able to talk to constituents about that. So I would just implore you, the more you can make us aware of what's happening and when, the better. But I'm a huge believer and supporter of ROC 2034 and look forward to cheerleading for the new zoning changes. I also just want to ask a couple other questions before I pass the mic. One is related to one of the KPIs is about developing a strategy to quantify the affordable housing gap that uses data specific to the city of Rochester, not the wider MSA. I would imagine a lot of that already came from the housing market study that we conducted about 2 years ago at this point. So I'd like to know what strategy are we developing outside of that housing market study? I also want to make sure when we're talking about affordable housing, we go back to what the mayor did 2 years ago by identifying that our targeted AMI is not the 120, but significantly lower than that. And just want you to comment on that as well, Commissioner.
Yes. So yes, the housing market study did some work on that, but not conclusive. So we actually have had some assistance from the Harvard Kennedy School students recently. They did a review of that in addition to some other things they were doing. And we have actually access to them over the summer to have them help even further with it. So we're going to take advantage of that. But from an affordability, in terms of quantifying this, number one, it has to happen, right? You can't have a goal to accomplish something in affordable housing if you don't know what the debt is that you're trying to cover, right? You need to identify what the gap is and then set out some strategic plan to address the gap. So we fully intend to exhaust all resources, both in conjunction with the Harvard School students and beyond that, to go into the weeds. We hope we can get DSS data. We can get Section 8 data. We have our regulated housing data. We have a variety of mechanisms that we can get private rent data. And so we hope to kind of present it in a, quadrant-based format of what rents are charged. And I don't know how we'll be able to break it down even narrower than quadrant, but then to determine what are those average rents and then to back end that on, okay, is that affordable for our residents? So there's a lot of work to do, but we really need to have something to guide us to say, we need X, and then we can start to forecast, how do we get to X? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Or how long is it going to take us to get there?
Right. And understanding that when we talk about the X that we need, I think what we all acknowledge over the last couple of years is that we really need more places that offer rent in the kind of 30 to 60 AMI than we need from the 80 to 120. That's not to say that we don't need both and all of the above in addition to some market rate, but that 30 to 60 is the sweet spot that we just don't have that much of that matches what income levels are. So I'm hopeful that as this strategy is developed, it's done really with the thought of how to specify the AMI levels that we're shooting for.
Yeah, I think we're going to try to incorporate the level of AMI and again, that quadrant base, because not only do we need the units in that AMI, but we need them in a diverse geography manner. We need them throughout the city, not just in certain neighborhoods.
Amen. My last question for this round, at least, is on the business corridor improvements. And I just want to give a quick shout out to the business development team and Dana and Thad. The work that Thad has done on the business grants over the last couple of months has been just remarkable. So kudos to that team. I just want to understand what the business corridor improvements on 614, it says implement plan for business corridor improvements in 2020 and 2021. I'm sure you're not implementing every single thing from the business corridor plan. Maybe this is something you want to provide in writing instead, but do you want to give some highlights of what you hope to accomplish this year?
I mean, I'll try to touch that and then ask Dana or Thad if they want to weigh in. So, I mean, that is in line with trying to address the streets that were subject of the commercial corridor study. So it's really providing resources in response to what the study reflected as a need. And Thad or Dana, if you want to add anything more than that.
Sure, Commissioner, thanks. So first of all, thank you for mentioning the hard work that Thad has done. I think he's somewhere in the neighborhood of nearing 350 grants for businesses right now that have suffered through COVID and have suffered again through the civil unrest. So we are actively making grants. I don't know how Thad keeps up the pace because he must sleep sometime, but I don't know when. So thank you so much for mentioning that. Back to the commercial corridors, though, the important thing here is that much of the work that we're doing on the commercial corridors is based on the commercial corridor study, but a lot of that actual focus is on rehab work, particularly through facade grants that would be made available to those businesses. So the funding for keeping the businesses going is part of what's happening through the other grants right now, but the actual infrastructure improvements to those businesses is what we're referring to in this KPI.
All right, I'd love to just have a little bit more of a sense. Maybe it's a work session sometime over the next couple of months, just because there were so many amazing things talked about in the commercial corridor study and so many different commercial corridors. And again, trying to understand what you're actually going to be able to implement from that down
Right.
to would be really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be added value if we had Bea there from the Redco perspective as well, because they're going to be doing a lot of focus on the commercial corridors as well.
Great, thanks. Before I go to Councilmember Lupien, just a quick question. I was happy to see an item in the budget 624 that talked about developing and implementing a property manager licensing program. And we know how important property managers are. And when you got a bad one, we know what can happen. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I was very happy to see that.
Absolutely, appreciate that. We've been talking about property manager licensing actually for over 20 years on and off. And the reason why we kept getting hung up on our inability to be successful in it is because of our lack of automation and systematic tools to be able to judge somebody's behavior. And by that, I mean, we had a lot of data, but we didn't have any constructive way to have that data tell us how people are doing. Well, now with building blocks, even though we want to add more data to it, and certainly land management will allow us to construct a system that has all useful data in it, we have enough data in it that we can construct, and we're working with the group that owns building blocks, told me, to construct an automated process that takes into account property maintenance responsibility and behavior that's not in line with expectations. And so, because you can't really, we have 9,000 properties we're dealing with most often, right? So we can't really have a manual process that is dependent on human beings saying John Smith is the worst and somebody else says Jane Doe's the worst. We need to have a system that can reflect all the data that we feel is reasonable to conclude a scoring mechanism that will quantify one way or another how you're doing in terms of your responsibility of managing a property. And so we had to be there before we could go down. So the second element that triggered it now is the City Rise funding. So the other thing that you can't really do these days is create programs unless there's associated funding, because you have to manage the program. Even though we have an automated way to calculate a scoring, we still have to facilitate the application renewal process, and we still have to have adjudication processes. So the City Rise grant availed that to us, and will allow us to have a sustainable effort through the collection of fees thereafter. So, you know, we got paused a minute here because of this, but it's a 2-year grant, and you know, it's this year's objective, and we fully intend to accomplish it this year. We started to engage with landlords and tenant advocates. We have our second meeting with the landlord groups. It's leaders of the various investors/landlord groups. Councilmember Patterson's on that team as well. That next meeting, I think, is the 18th. So we're going to start to talk about these subjects. Now, this is just one of the subjects. Right now, we have to figure out how do we reintroduce inspections into our programs again. So we're going to hammer out that detail. And then we're going to talk about the emergency hazard abatement program, which we already have a draft policy, and we want to talk through that. Once we're done with those two, then we can focus on the property manager licensing.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm excited about it and look forward to hearing more about it. Councilmember Lupien.
Hi, Commissioner Claire. I'll just circle back to the roofing program. So in the capital improvement plan, it says that the roofing program, as well as Home Rochester, decreased in funding. And I know that it doesn't necessarily mean that the $500,000 for the roofing program is actually being decreased because of other funding sources or rollover. Can you say how much each of those programs, you know, how much funding is being lost?
So in the CIP process, the only funding that continued this year because of the circumstances that we were under was the roofing program, and it was funded at half the $1 million that it annually typically is. So we have $500,000. We are looking, you know, both budget and the mayor's support, revisiting that if our funding and our, you know, our fiscal situation changes. But that said, between what we have there and what we have on hand, we're comfortable that we'll be able to serve the same population of people that we had been serving annually. We had been budgeting, I want to say 60 roofs. I think we've already done 80 this year. We've been able to lower the cost because we used to have 2 contractors that did all the roofs. Now we bid out each job. And so we have a more competitive environment. And so the costs have come down a little bit. Of course, the biggest impact to the roof cost is the asbestos survey and abatement part of it. But we've been able to lower that cost. We're doing more roofs. And between that and the fact that we had some cash on hand, we're going to be able to sustain that effort this year. All the other programs in MBD, we did a full evaluation of all the resources we have on hand. So we are able to cover any gap this year that was caused by the defunding of CIP. So we were comfortable doing that and confident that we could carry on without any impact. Now, next year would be a different scenario, right? So we had a little buffer, and that buffer will be used this year.
Okay, good to hear. I wonder, and this is, I'm not really sure if this is exactly what Councilmember Ortiz asked, but I want to know how many residents of the programs serve, you know, normally, versus how many we have to turn away, and not necessarily because of just the qualification, but how much when we run out of funding, how many people are left without that.
The grant program?
Yeah, for roofing. Mhm.
So, well, roofing, it used to look like we left a lot of people out, right? Because we used to lottery 60 and we had 1,200 applicants. But because we were able to do a lot of legwork out in the field to really truly investigate every one of those, some of that was because of the benefit of some downtime here, to be honest with you. We've been really able to more, in a more perfect sense, assess what really needs to happen out there. So, I mean, we can't speak to 65,000 parcels and the roofs of every structure, but the people that expressed an interest, we did survey every one of those properties. And so we're comfortable where we're at with that population. As soon as we get back going again, we'll get the word out so we can get some more applications in. The other thing that we did with the roof program, and we do with all our rehab programs, is wherever we're having a housing development project, we want to try to go into that neighborhood even before the ground is cut with the development to start to help the owners in that neighborhood get their properties where they need to be so that they're not left behind when they see all these new houses go up. And so, and to a certain extent that works, but you might be surprised that not everybody wants a grant, even if they need one.
Thank you. So I noticed that there's maybe a KPI about maintenance of database of homeowners and rentals is eliminated. Is that going to be moved to a different area, or is that just, an efficiency that we don't need anymore?
Can you point to where you're referring to? Because that's not making sense to me.
I did not write the page number down. But
say it again.
The maintenance of database, the maintenance of the database.
Okay. I think you're talking about the land management project. So basically, it might have referenced the fact that we're replacing the biz system.
Okay, that might make sense.
Yeah, that's probably what.
Yeah, thank you. I have two more questions before I jump back in line. One is, so what's the process for the evaluation of the performance of code enforcement officers? And I know they have a huge job to do, but I hear sometimes from people feeling like there's not the same application across the city, like maybe say for high grass, like, I'm always the test case for things. I get a couple of high grass warnings a year because I'm so busy, where in other areas, they don't get a warning, they just get the ticket. So how does that work in terms of the kind of equal application of the?
So first of all, there's no warning for grass. You probably got a notice and order, right? That's not a warning. That's a notice and order. And then and what follows that up 2 weeks later is a ticket.
Okay, but, well, I must have cut it.
Yeah, we don't give warnings for grass because we just have too much of it to deal with. I mean, we issue like 5,000 notice and orders for grass. We do a really good job, best we can, auditing both randomly, we audit tandemly, we audit after the fact, and we audit through complaint-driven processes. And we don't audit for penal purposes. We audit to build people's skill sets. Because we are human structure, these are human beings, and they have varying degrees of backgrounds and experiences in the construction trades and in code enforcement. All of them are at different paces of what I say is you really need 10 years before you really know enough about what we're doing to be what I would say is an expert, even though we have some people really thriving and doing well after 2 years. But it's a 2-year training program, and then we do audit and keep track of audits thereafter through our senior staff who have like 8 or 9 inspectors each. So we have 3 senior inspectors and we have a trainer. Those combined efforts from those senior staff try to keep building the gaps in the skill sets. I will tell you that because that is not a new, statement that somebody may make, but I will tell you that the situations more often than not when people make that claim upon review and assessment, it's not really, a lot of it is perception, and we know perception's real. And and we have to deal with perception. So we often talk about, we go through situations and scenarios in our training with the inspection staff to talk about what would you do here? What would you do here? And you have to talk through it because again, they are human, but we have policies in place to guide them. We have auditing in place to make sure they're doing what we, what is instructed. And more than anything, because again, I used to read all the satisfaction surveys, almost 100% of the time, even if it's a dissatisfied customer, they rave about how not just the inspector, but everybody that touched them in the process handled themselves. That is the main reason we do the satisfaction survey, because you just don't know unless you're reaching out to people. So we do best we can through surveys to tell us what's the problem. And then because we can't address, we only know what we know. So we can't address things we don't know.
Thank you. So kind of a, related question. High grass, for example, if you don't cut it with a certain amount of days, you get a ticket. It's a very kind of automatic process. But there's, other code enforcement processes that are, more discretionary. And just wondering, do you see, so for, something that's a health and safety, is there an opportunity to have more of an automatic, if you don't solve it within this period of time, this is what happens kind of situation?
So we kind of do. So I think that you probably want to get more familiar with our policies, because our policies speak to various subjects within that health and safety environment, whether it's no heat, vacate orders, things of that nature. There's a lot of tools that we have. It's not just about ticketing. It's not just about, vacating. There's a lot of things in between. What we say is this, is when you're balancing priorities in 9,000 cases with 26 people, if you're mitigating hazards in a reasonable time, progressing and communicating, you don't get ticketed. That's the bottom line. If any of those things are missing, then we have to assess the case. And that case may be one of those 4,800 tickets we issue a year. And if it happens to be a worse scenario, it might be one of the 3 city court cases we initiate next month. If it happens to be one of our most distressed vacant properties, it might find its way in a demo hearing. If it happens to be one of our vacant properties where the foreclosure is not being pursued, it might find its way to the abandonment action, right? But all of those pipelines have limitations, mostly because we have limitations access to court, and we have limitations access to legal services. So, but I think that you can't oversimplify it by saying if a violation is this old, it should be ticketed. It's just not that robotic. It really is. It's just using reasonable approaches to getting something resolved without compromising people's safety. And if you look at a code enforcement policy, you'll see how we break it down between cases that are rental properties, cases that are owner occupant, cases that are vacant. And then within those 3 subjects, we break it down to sub case types.
Where would I find the code enforcement policy?
We can get it to you.
Yeah, it'd
It's
be
on
great.
file. It's on file in the clerk's office, but we can get it to you.
Okay, thank you so
Good.
much.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Gruber, did you have I'll start with you. You got a second round?
Sure. What a treat.
Special treat. Don't get used to it.
Yeah, well, we're at the end of our run, aren't we?
Yeah.
Commissioner Kirkmeyer, I want to give major kudos on the work that you and your team did on the tobacco licenses. I think that was really the tobacco business permits. I think I should say. I think that was really smart work. It was probably January, February that we passed that. And I'm wondering if you could just talk for a moment about your plans for enforcement from that this year, and if you anticipate any revenues from it or not in the budget.
So service centers have reached out to all of the impacted businesses. Not all have applied. Right now, we're kind of operating in the let's stimulate the economy and let businesses get up and going, not really going aggressively towards people that have failed to do the simple application process as of yet. That day will probably come. But right now, we have these other challenges that we're trying to make sure are putting this city on a nice path forward. In terms of revenue, you know, it's a $25 fee. It's never been about revenue with the business permits. I think we could certainly charge more and justify it, but it's really about getting businesses into a process that avails them an annual review, or us, an annual review of their behavior and how they're treating customers and the community that they are surrounded by. And you know, you don't have an inherent right to get the business permit. You earn that right through the renewal application process. So it really is a critical process from that perspective, but it certainly isn't serving any form of increased revenue.
Got it. Well, again, I can't express enough how supportive I am of the notion. Obviously, I'm sure many of us on the phone, but certainly the neighborhood service coordinators out here all know how critical the corner store is in their neighborhoods, and how oftentimes the corner stores do abuse our system in different ways. And I think that this is a great opportunity potentially to work closer with them. And I would encourage, you know, anything that we can possibly do. I think this is the way to do it. So kudos to your team. And I hear you that revenue is not the goal on that. I guess my last question, truly, Chair Evans, is well, that's because we've already spoken about the abatement fund, Gary, and recently, and I'm sure we'll have some conversation about that in the coming months. But my last question is about the Susan B. Anthony House. I see there's a KPI or at least an objective about it this year. Obviously, they're planning some pretty major construction over there. I think it'd be a game changer for the entire southwest part of the city. Just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what the NBD's plan is.
So that's the Southwest Neighborhood Service Center's objective, to kind of go out, sort of like I just explained we do with the housing development areas, where we go in before the development and try to raise up the properties that need help, the owner occupants. Similar in that respect, where they're going out proactively and looking at the commercial corridor, they're looking at the neighborhood, the residential neighborhoods that are situated near there, and trying to, you know, set that up so that it coincides nicely with anything that the Susan B. Anthony folks are doing from a development perspective. So it kind of shines a bright light on the whole area and not just their parcels that they're improving.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Pio?
Yes, I'm here. So my question goes to key performance indicator A, creating new housing units. My question on that is, I've spoken to some developers, and it seems the fee that they pay is the same regardless of how big the planned development is. Is that correct? So if they're looking to build one house, the fee for that permit is the same fee as an entire 100-unit building?
No. The fees are based on the size of the project. That's not accurate.
Okay. Maybe they're discussing something else there. The next one is efficiently resolve neighborhood code complaints. It shows that we're going to have an average time to resolve these complaints is 90 days. How can we get that lowered? It seems like 90 days to resolve a neighborhood code complaints seems pretty long.
So you have to take into consideration that that's a very broad category. So I'll give you an example. Tonight, there's a fire at 1 First Street. We don't have a case on the property yet. Tomorrow, there's a complaint on that property. That case could theoretically be open for 4 years before either foreclosure or demolition occurs, right? So there's that complaint. Then there's the complaint by a tenant that has missing smoke alarms and a ceiling falling down in their living room. So what we don't have the capacity in our system currently is to separate the two. A complaint's a complaint's a complaint. So we think that 90 days call to closure is a really good average time. But I will tell you that that is one of the carryover KPIs, and we have been experiencing under 60 days. And being in this field, that's I'm shocked by that, to be honest with you. But the statistics are factual. That's what we like about these KPIs, that they come right out of the system. They can't lie. They're telling you what the data says. And when we saw that, I think we've been doing like 55 days and 60 days. I was shocked by that, to be honest with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Others with questions before we conclude?
Just a comment.
Councilmember Patterson, comment.
The last example, how come that couldn't have been Murray Street instead of First Street?
Oh, First Street always comes to my mind, Mike, because it's first.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
All right. I want to, Councilmember Lupien, you got a last question?
I got 3 that I don't need the answer to right away.
Okay, go ahead.
So I get data on loan and grant recipients, the percent NWBE, annual revenue, income level, that kind of thing. Then if more information about the Redco public reports, is that money that that's going out from us to them, or is that kind of like a complete picture of what's going on at Redco? And then 2019 tax auction results, the owner and sale price. These owners have current code violations and are there, where are they in the C of O process?
As it pertains to the first question, can you repeat that? You said you don't completely understand what's going on at Redco?
No, so there was talk earlier about public reports, and Commissioner Kirkmeyer said that, you know, they want to report on anything that's kind of adjacent to what they're doing. And so I was wondering if that's just kind of a report of the money that's going from the city to Redco, or will it be more of a full picture of what Redco's financials look like?
You would be entitled to all of Redco's financials and reports and all of that. And if there's a member of city council that's appointed to Redco, so you could always talk to your council colleague.
Okay, thank you.
And Redco has their own funding.
Oh, 2 members, I'm sorry. The council president and council vice president are both on the Redco board.
Myself and Councilman Patterson.
Oh, okay.
Patterson,
all right.
yeah, Patterson.
With
Patterson
Council
Lightfoot.
President Scott and Vice President Lightfoot. So she switched it up on me.
Okay, Councilmember Pio, you had one last thing?
Yeah, sorry. So for zoning, okay, and it seems as if a lot of constituents are looking for either accessory unit development or smaller homes so that we could build more affordable homes. Do we have anything in the works so that we can get developers together to go over the different zoning laws? Because it seems as if it's pretty hard to build small homes under a certain square footage without coming across some of these zoning issues where they have to have certain number of windows, certain feet away from each other. Can we put something together for them to come together and talk about our zoning laws and how we could do better?
Right. I'll start off and then I'll turn it over to the commissioner. As you probably are aware, council member, after we passed the comprehensive plan, Rochester 2034, one of the items that came out of that was to do a zoning code rewrite. And the commissioner and his team are in the process of working with the planning department to actually do that rewrite, to do the things that you are talking about. I believe that council has already authorized some dollars for us to start that process. Part of the process we're going to do in-house, and then part we'll do with the consultant. But I believe that council has already started, passed legislation to deal with the zoning code rewrite, because in order to comply with Rochester 2034 and the items that the community talked about as, smaller homes, co-housing, other items that are located within there, especially as it pertains to our commercial corridors that are zone residential, we needed to change our zoning code. Commissioner, do you want to add to that?
You captured it pretty well, Mayor. I'll just add that just in general, that we recognize that density is a major reinforced theme in the comprehensive plan. And, you know, I will tell you that that will be, you know, Councilmember Gruber asked earlier about, you know, where the rubber will meet the road here and engagement and going back to the community with a zoning rewrite. That will be a subject that gets a lot of attention, that you all will be dealing directly with, as we will. But it speaks very loudly and clearly right now in the comprehensive plan that we need to be a more dense city, and most cities are going in that direction.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure we're not just having people who are in a back office creating it, but also getting the input from people who are actually doing it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you know, the comprehensive plan, remember the level of engagement in that process, which was multi-year, involved construction experts, residents, tenant advocates, landlords. I mean, everybody was engaged in that process. So, you know, those weren't just, you know, we didn't just pick that out of the sky type of thing. So, but we're going to go back to, you know, you can't just have a draft that's approved. You have to engage people about what that draft is, why those changes were made, what are the changes from this code to that code. And all of those conversations will be with all of that population again.
And as you know, council has already approved the contracts, us putting a community engagement organization for us to be able to work with an external partner. I believe that there's about 4 external companies that are on term agreements for us to develop those relationships and those discussions with community partners. So our thought process is not to do anything in a vacuum, as we don't do anything in a vacuum. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but part of the zoning code rewrite would definitely have to include the people that will be most impacted by the changes in the zoning code.
Thank you very much.
I want to, first off, Commissioner Kirkmeyer, thank you and the NBD team, because you guys do such a great job of keeping council informed through work sessions, because you touch so many different various areas of the city, and some of them are major items. But one of the things I'm always happy about is, even with coming to this budget hearing, looking through some of the KPIs and other things that are in the budget, I knew about them because you have done a great job of regularly keeping us informed. And I'm just thinking about affordable housing conversation work sessions and all types of other work sessions that you've provided for us. And I hope that you will continue to do that, because I think that does a great job in terms of seeing problems that might emerge before they happen and having the dialogue before they actually come for approval. So I really want to thank you for your work on that. And I hope that we continue to have that collaboration and partnership as we go forward.
Well, I appreciate that, Councilmember Evans, and we will be seeing you every quarter.
I know.
At our regularly scheduled MBD council work session. Yeah,
and those have been extremely helpful, I know, for me, and I'm sure I speak for the other council members. I want to thank you and your team for coming on the line, particularly later in the day, to be peppered with all of our questions. And again, I just thank you and your team for your courtesy and professionalism. I also want to thank the mayor and the budget director for, again, their hard work during these difficult times. I mean, I know it's harder when you don't have us in the room and we're asking questions remotely, and you got to put together a budget with shifting possible revenue sources. I think that people just really need to understand the work that goes into that. And I want to thank the mayor and her team for their work with this. I want to thank also council staff, BJ Scanlon, folks in the council office, Hazel Washington, and the folks in the clerk's office for all of their work and what they've done. And then I want to thank the 8 other folks that I have the honor of serving with for your patience and indulgence. I know that I can come across as cranky. That will not change, but I hope that it was, at least I got you through most of the sections of this budget book, and that you got your questions answered. And if you did not, I want to do at least everything in my power to make sure that you feel as though you've gotten your questions answered. The administration has done a great job in terms of getting answers back very quickly, either be it in writing or questions that we've asked. So I'm hoping that you all are in a place where you feel that way. Tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Chairman Evans. I want to echo the things that you've offered. They are certainly appropriate. Everybody has just done a phenomenal job. You know, it's amazing what we've been able to accomplish under these really kind of odd conditions, but we do great work. Mayor, you and your team are the bomb. You know that. We look forward to what we got to do Thursday, right? We had to talk about this again on Thursday.
Well, tomorrow we have lucky for you all, we have the Rochester City School District budget, which I'm sure you guys have all been through, but you know, we've had 2 sessions with them before. And also, if you have not received the letter from the comptroller, I would ask you to make sure that you read that and be prepared to come with any questions that you might have regarding the district budget. That is tomorrow afternoon, I believe. Is it 3:30, the hearing, Mr. Scanlon?
3:30 starts the budget hearing for the district, yes. The public hearing that is joint with the Board of Education will start at 5:30.
And we'll start at 5:30. So we will see each other for a bunch of hours tomorrow around that. So I look forward to seeing you then. And then we also have the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday.
Can I just
Councilmember Lightfoot, you look like you, Council Vice President, you look like you want to say something. Go ahead.
I just wanted to echo the President Scott, as far as the work that you've done, brother, as Chairman of Finance, the work that you've done in your committee, I think is outstanding, man. You did an outstanding job in unprecedented time. First time ever that we've had budget hearings virtually. And I also want to thank the mayor and administration and council, because the Open Meetings Committee recognized Rochester as one of the areas, one of the cities that still continue to hold their meetings open for public comment. And whereas other cities have relaxed their public hearing comment section, and where we are continually making available ways for our public to continue to comment on our meetings. So I think that has to be commended, because we could have easily relaxed our efforts because of COVID-19, and we chose not to do that, speaking to our transparency and not doing things in a vacuum and open, as well as we're oftentimes broadcasting on 2 platforms, on YouTube and on Facebook, as well as taking the input in from emails. So I think that should speak to this city, that Rochester is a city that is progressive, that we're open, we're transparent, and we always look for comments from our citizens. So kudos to administration, as well as you, Mr. Chairman, for the fine job you've done with these budget hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I appreciate it. And with that, I will adjourn this Finance Committee meeting if there are no other questions or comments. And
I just
Madam Mayor?
to, on behalf of the administration, thank you, Chairman Evans, for your leadership and really getting us through this process virtually. It was very different for us on our side, but having you leading the charge, keeping everyone on task and on track on our side, as well as yours, was very much appreciated. And we definitely want to thank the council president, vice president, and all the members of council for your questions. We will do our best to get you the answers to all of your questions before Thursday, definitely before Tuesday when you vote on the budget. I cannot echo the sentiments regarding the work that Chris Wagner and his team, our budget team, did as it pertains to the budget. It's very hard to be planning a budget during a pandemic, but they did it, and it's balanced, it's fair, and it definitely keeps, our city going in the right direction. And all of our commissioners and the great work in their team and the 3,000 employees of the city of Rochester. You cannot do anything in a vacuum or do it alone. And it is because all of us during this pandemic lift each other up and really protected each other during this time that we were able to get through this. And so I really, truly want to thank all of our employees as well as Councilmember and your staff for making this easier. We know that there were some bumps and some hills along the road, but we did it and we did it together. And so we're looking forward to making sure that we continue to work together as we go forward. I know the council president and I had some discussion on some changes. And so I know that Chris will be talking to you, Council President, about the changes that we talked about yesterday and some amendments that Council wanted to make to the budget. So we'll make sure we get that over to you to be included as well.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And thank you, and thank you all. And I just want to urge everyone to still be safe. There is still a pandemic out there. It is far, far, far from over, and it's definitely not the time to be relaxed. And I know that all of us are community people and we're all out and about, but please be safe as you go throughout your journey. So with that, I will adjourn this meeting. And I want to thank you all for your time and attention during this process. Thank you so much.
I did have one quick question.
Oh, yes, Madam President.
The public hearing for tomorrow, did council release that information already? Because we had some questions about, okay, you've already released it, okay.
Yep, we can send out more information again tonight, but folks have until 1 o'clock to contact the office. They can email council@cityofrochester.gov with their comments, which would be read on air for up to 3 minutes. They may also leave a voicemail, which we could play the audio file, and folks that want to request to be on the Zoom call will be sent a link tomorrow after we've had time to process everything, and they will be invited to join. We only caution people that if you're not familiar with Zoom, that might not be the best option, because we will only be able to let people in if their username matches the name that they signed up with, because we will need to be able to monitor who is coming in and won't be able to identify you otherwise. All of that information is available on cityofrochester.gov/public meetings, where you can also find any other city public meeting and where to watch them online if you would like.
Thank you, BJ, because I had an email about that. I just wanted to make sure that the public knew that we had time, or council was going to have time to hear the public and was having a time.
If you forward that to me, I'll send them that information.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right, thank you.
All righty.